Well, gang, another year has gone by, and with it we have received a whole slew of rather interesting titles, ranging from RPGs, adventure games, shooters, visual novels, and so on, with many of them being sequels to some franchises that we love, while others being entirely new and novel experiences. So of course it is only natural that we get all of our favorite experiences and I put them all into one big-ass, feature-length list for all of you to enjoy and presumably ignore in order to go back to playing your latest brain-devouring grand strategy game or ogling the newest, shiniest skin for your live service game of choice. Cheeky jokes aside, I have to say that this year we have, as per usual, a whole slew of titles that are all over the damn place in genres, narrative, tones, and gameplay styles, which will make this a verifiably Tomthechosen1 ass list. I don't want to say, gang, before we get to the honorable mentions, that if your game of choice did not make it onto this list, that doesn't mean that it's bad or anything like that. It just means that usually I didn't play it, or it's just not my cup of tea. But that's okay, because, you know, we all got different tastes. And speaking of tastes, today we're going to be having some nice, wonderful Pampero, a nice rum from my homeland of Venezuela. So damn close to where we live, actually, which is kind of crazy. So I have that right over here in this nice little Moomin mug that I absolutely love. So to a nice, wonderful year of 2025. Cheers, gang. Nice and smooth. But anyways, we're heading on to the honorable mentions. These are games on the list that may or may not, they're not bad games. They require their own special mention, but they just didn't make it onto the list. They didn't make it into the top 10. Either they narrowly avoided it, or it was just, not my cup of tea, or they have a few flaws. And the first one that we're going to talk about is Silent Hill F, the latest entry in the Silent Hill franchise from Neobards Entertainment. Silent Hill F is the latest in the long-running survival horror franchise from Konami, following last year's Silent Hill 2 remake developed by Bloober Team, but this time around, Silent Hill F is developed by Neobards Entertainment out of Hong Kong, and takes the setting from the sleepy, foggy town of Silent Hill in Maine to the land of the rising sun in 1960s Japan. A staggering change, I do gotta say. You play the role of Hinako Shimizu, a high school girl living in the town of Ebisugaoka, who, after getting into an argument with her deadbeat alcoholic dad, leaves the house, and while meeting some friends, the town gets engulfed in fog and spider-like lilies by a mysterious entity, separating the gang and creating monsters from the darkest recesses of her psyche, as per usual for Silent Hill. After coming to and realizing the situation, Hinako and friends hatch a plan to get the hell out of Dodge with hopefully their skins intact. Now, for the fellas out there that know me, you know that one of my favorite survival horror franchises of all time is Silent Hill, if not arguably my favorite. And while Silent Hill F is well developed with decent gameplay and some pretty damn good performances, overall the experience for me left me a little bit wanting. Gameplay-wise, the gripes that I have mostly have to do with the pace of the combat, where the game eschews its more deliberately clunky combat for something that is a lot more akin to an action-adventure game, or Souls-like as some have described it, even though I think that's a huge misnomer in this case. Typically, one would expect that the relative fragility of the player is what enhances the tense combat in survival horror titles, but Neobards decided that they would attempt a much more action-oriented approach that sadly for me just doesn't really do much. That being said, the bigger gripes I have with Silent Hill F actually have to do with the narrative, and less that it is lacking in quality, and more that personally, for me, this is not the Silent Hill that I particularly enjoy, and frankly not what I want out of this franchise narratively. When I think of Silent Hill, I tend to think of Western settings, characters, and cultures going through a very Eastern-oriented psychological journey. A sort of melding of East and West that makes the franchise interesting, and the fact that even Akira Yamaoka composed the soundtrack, but it's not that grungy sort of rock and industrial music, it just didn't really resonate with me. Now, for all the fellas out there that enjoyed Silent Hill F, I'm not saying it's a bad game. If anything, it's a very damn fine survival horror game. It's just not my cup of tea when it comes to Silent Hill, nor the direction I really want the franchise to go in. But if you enjoyed it yourself, that's just fine and dandy. Now, I will say one thing that's kind of crazy is that if you could have changed up the narrative a little bit and added some new mechanics and added the camera obscura from the Fatal Frame games, I think you would have had like the best damn Fatal Frame game in a long ass time, because this game feels a lot more like those games. But hey, That's just how it rolls. But moving on to our second honorable mention is the ever wonderful Death Stranding 2 on the beach, developed by the auteur maestro himself, Hideo Kojima, and all the fine fiends over at Kojima Productions. Death Stranding 2 is of course the sequel to 2019's Death Stranding, which continues Sam Porter Bridges' journey to reconnect a destroyed world one package at a time. While very divisive for those that have played it, to me I find the original Death Stranding to be one of the most therapeutic games that I have ever played, with its emphasis of traversing a destroyed world, with the only ones out there being you, BB, and the various BTs that lurk in the shadows whenever it rains heavily. It's that same sort of therapeutic that I would also attach to games like Stalker, where it's a whole lot of low-intensity dread, with the feeling that things can change on a dime, mixed in with those high-intensity moments when you come across the BTs or mules that threaten to ruin the perfectly good run that you've had so far. And while the narrative is characteristically Kojima, where it both hits you on the head with its themes and seemingly makes no sense, I learned to really enjoy the world that they have created and performances of the various characters, especially Sam and Cliff, which are portrayed by Norman Reedus and the timeless Mads Mikkelsen respectively. My love for the first game would have everyone believe that I would be jumping for joy to give the sequel a try, especially since the Italian actor Luca Marinelli is playing a character, but the simple reasoning is that sadly, as of this video, Death Stranding 2 is a PS5 exclusive, and I was not able to source one in order to play it, so I will humbly wait for the sequel to show up in PC, hopefully around sometime this year. Now fellas, I will have to say that if you do end up seeing Death Stranding 2 on the beach on the top 10 games of 2026, don't be weirded out, because I do not give a damn. If that game is top 10 material and I play it this year, then well, it's top 10 material and it'll go on to the list. But one final game that I want to mention is a very interesting one. It is a single person developed indie game, a survival horror game developed by a Twitter artist that I really enjoy called uhhh or something like that, known as Studio System Guardian Angel. Studio System Guardian Angel puts us in the cloggy girl failure shoes of Becky, a high schooler who with her other friends discover a sort of hidden film studio underneath the school that sends the gang in a very trippy, disassociative rabbit hole. Once the sort of weirdo mirror world / film studio is entered, reality unfolds in a number of ways not too dissimilar to the Otherworld segments in Silent Hill, but this time with really stark, trippy Technicolor visuals that makes the whole experience just feel kind of like out of body. Playing like a lot of the OG classics, Studio System has a fixed camera angle and tank controls, but the big key takeaway for the gameplay this time around is that the fixed camera is actually your most potent weapon, and the most useful tool, as how you angle it and move it around will have you dispatching enemies and solving puzzles across the game. Gameplay and general polish wise, the game is a little rough around the edges, but to me the style of the game, which includes not just the visuals of the world but also the sprites of the characters drawn by uhhh himself, and the sound design that always seems to keep me on edge with its droning ambience cut across every so often with some more acoustic tracks when you're speaking to some of the characters. It might not be for everyone, but if you're looking for a really unique survival horror game that genuinely isn't like anything else out there, then I would highly recommend that you give Studio System a try. It's only around €10, but it's worth it for the experience, and hopefully uhhh will make some more unique experiences in the future. And just like that, gang, we're done the honorable mentions, and I also want to remind you fellas just once more that these games are not bad, not at all. They're actually pretty damn good. They just require their own special little mention, but just didn't quite make it onto the list. Otherwise, I wouldn't have talked about them here. But that being said, it's high time that we get to the top 10 itself, and so with that, without further delay, let's head on over to number 10.
Number 10.
Starting off at number 10 on our list is Demonschool, a turn-based tactics RPG developed by Necrosoft Games, where you play the role of Faye, a dumb idiot high school girl who fashions herself a genuine demon hunter, who with the help of her reluctant gal pal Namako head over to Hemsk Island to attend the academy there and put a stop to the end of the world. Nobody, not even Namako, believes her of course, so through the course of this goofy ass tactics RPG that mixes gameplay influences ranging from Persona, Fire Emblem, and Sega Saturn aesthetics with the subject matter of Japanese horror lathering on top of the color grading of Dario Argento's Suspiria, and setting it all to the goofy ass high school horror comedy tune of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Will Faye succeed in stopping the end of the world? Will she finally be able to lift the veil on the very threat of demons infesting everything? Will she be able to ask that special someone to the spooky prom? Or perhaps she's gonna have to put all that aside so she can finish her report on a haunted videotape before she gets her ass kicked out of the academy and thrown in jail. Oh boy, Demonschool is such an interesting example and a classic case of a game to show up on this top 10 because it is a development made by a bunch of scrappy devs with limited resources that end up making something wonderful. So with that, let's get enrolled at this here academy and let's talk about the gameplay of Demonschool. From an immediate glance of the gameplay, there are a few different aspects that went into Demonschool, those being the tactical RPG combat inspired by the likes of Fire Emblem, where your gang of scrappy high schoolers fight demons, punks, and sentient VHS tapes with their feet, fists, and other interesting tools, and then after the fight is over, it transfers to the school/social life management part of the game that is most closely related to the Persona titles, where you spend your time dealing with the inhabitants of the island, completing small tasks, and hanging out with your high school buds. Now, the first thing that should be said in regards to the gameplay in both combat and the social aspects is that if you go into Demonschool expecting these mechanics to be of the same level of depth and development as its aforementioned inspirations, then you might be left a little bit wanting since the gameplay in both aspects might seem comparatively shallow. Take for instance the combat, that typically with turn-based tactics games I tend to look at every encounter as its sort of puzzle that needs solving. You figure that if you place this guy over here, and then you can place another companion over here where he can buff your fighter, but steer clear of that incoming enemy attack, and that sets you up to use your mage that has been waiting patiently over here to commit some spells to the fray, and then BAM! You got the whole puzzle solved. Then we have Demonschool that, while not being completely devoid of those puzzles, I will say is lacking in just a teeny little bit of crunch when it comes to the combat. Like, it has everything there for you to enjoy the combat while you're playing the game, but never being so in-depth that you can really get your noggin jogging to figure out just how in the hell are you going to get out of this one. Though that being said, one area that I really enjoyed with the combat of Demonschool is that a lot of the combat is engaged and around the idea of punting and pulling enemies into spaces where you can take the most advantage of. It could be something as simple as you having Newt buff up Faye with a higher damage, get Destin and Namako to perform a combo against some deadbeat punk, and then have Destin after that send that guy flying all the way across the grid over to Faye so she can lay the beatdown of a righteous roundhouse kick to finish him off. It might not seem like a lot, but when all the gears are going on, the combat is pretty fun. I just wish there was a little bit more crunch. But moving on to the social aspects of the game, similarly, there's enough there to be entertained, and I could certainly say even more so than the combat, due to the fact that these sections are where the narrative and the character writing shines, but even then, when compared to say Persona, it leaves just a little bit to be desired. It's your typical mix of dealing with side characters throughout the island that expand the world, heading over and dumping coins into an increasingly more talkative shrine, and of course hanging out with your buddies to further their individual storylines and get to know them a little bit better. And just like Persona, the more that you hang out with your squad, which could be with stuff like helping out the film buff Newt in his search for rare and esoteric VHS tapes, teaching Namako how to improve her awful cooking, which is admittedly pretty funny since it's a genre staple, and probably one of my favorites in Destin with his search for the Snake Man. When all of these are said and done, you're rewarded with new skills and gameplay abilities that will help you out in combat. But while the combat and social elements might not be as in-depth as the titles that Demonschool is was inspired by. For the experience that for me was just below 40 hours, it's more than serviceable and felt like a lot of fun to play, and by the time that these mechanics start to get tiring, the game summarily wraps itself up. Honestly, gang, I think it needs to be reminded that Necrosoft Game is only a development studio of like 6 or so people, plus contractors of course, but it's a pretty scrappy team, so what they've done so far is pretty damn good, even if it has a little bit of flaws. But now it's time to talk about the parts of Demonschool that I really did enjoy, and that is of course the narrative and the presentation, which are both wonderful. But first, let's start off with the narrative, and let's wonder why Faye is so damn interested in these demons. I will just say, fellas, that your enjoyment of the narrative elements of Demonschool will largely depend on whether or not you're a fan of all the different influences that go into it. Prime of which is probably Buffy the Vampire Slayer, in that on the whole, Faye and friends are really just a bunch of goofy goobers. That is of course not to say that the game has its fair share of moments with gravity placed on it, but for the most part the narrative doesn't take itself all too seriously, and the charm comes from how impassionate a lot of the characters are. I especially enjoy how in-depth someone like Faye can get into her upbringing of alleged demon hunting, drowning out all reservations other might have by just comically talking over them, or the genuine lamentations of Newt not being able to get his hands on a haunted VHS tape and experience the esoterica of succumbing to a curse within 3 days. Though at the same time, I can imagine the style of writing to be rather annoying for some, especially for vocal detractors and accusers of any sort of character being genuine in their oddities, labeling them LOL so random characters. I just need to say that if you are in that boat, then it might be best to steer clear away from Demonschool and enjoy some of the other narrative experiences that there are to be had in 2025. Personally, I'm a fan of stupid idiot characters with their loyal squad of more grounded friends who reluctantly get dragged into everything, and that sort of fun zaniness gets infested into all aspects of the writing. I especially remember any time when Faye is questioning if someone has ever been kicked in the head, or the name box for an NPC being Cop whose name is apparently Tom even though he looks nothing like me. I guess I mean to say, to me, the writing in comparison to a lot of other RPGs, and especially JRPGs, feels a lot more natural. Like, yeah, sure, these are high school kids and they can be a little bit annoying, but high school kids are and will continue to be annoying, sometimes lovably so. And the fact that the dialogue comes across naturally instead of overtly melodramatic or anime cheesy is a bit refreshing. So in regards to the narrative, just like with the gameplay, it's that it's not the craziest, most groundbreaking thing you're going to experience, but it just does a great job of showcasing these characters and having a neat, spooky, infested conspiracy that you will slowly unravel and generally be a lot of fun to go through for the 40 or so hours that you can get to the end. And that leads me probably to my favorite aspect of Demonschool, and that is of course the presentation that's split between Dario Argento-esque Technicolors and a nice organ-laden synth bopping soundtrack that is good for busting down some demons, because hey, you know what they say, busting makes me feel good. To start off with the visuals, Demonschool honestly looks like a long-lost tactics RPG that could have been found on the PlayStation 1 or Sega Saturn, what with its charmingly old-school aesthetic of 3D backgrounds, mixed with pixel-perfect sprite work and animations for characters on the board, so to speak. Then following that with more detailed hand-drawn sprites for whenever any of the characters are talking. And I really do gotta say, gang, from the style that a lot of the characters have in their sprites, as well as some effects that could be seen in game, especially when you go from the overworld to a battle and the whole world sort of melts away in Technicolor splendor to reveal the board with all the enemies, it could really have been an old school title that was just lost to time, and I really do appreciate and love that aesthetic. But what I appreciate even more is the Technicolor aspect of it all. The uses of incredibly bright and staggering colors that paint the world in bright, clean colors to show the normality and mundaneness of things, only for streaks of purple and pink to clear away reality to show the stark unreality underneath it all. And when these bright colors come out to play, it especially reminds me of the cinema of Dario Argento, such as Deep Red and especially his film Suspiria, that is enhanced by the fact that the film follows a heroine in a dance academy that gives you the same feel that beneath what seems like a serious and mundane school is something much more sinister. which honestly describes Demonschool to a T, apart from the fact that Faye and friends have dialogue much closer to Buffy the Vampire Slayer than the original soundtrack for Suspiria, composed by the Italian band Goblin, though the influence in the soundtrack for Demonschool can still be heard. For instance, Claudio Simonetti, for the gang out there that are not familiar, is a composer and one of the brainchilds of the Italian prog rock band Goblin that has composed a genuinely extensive film and soundtrack discography spanning the works of Ruggero Deodato, Sergio Martino, Lucio Fulci, and most frequently with Italian giallo cinema maestro Dario Argento, with such films as Suspiria, Deep Red, Tenebrae, and so on. And while I cannot say for certain that Claudio Simonetti was an outright influence, but what makes Feldman's soundtrack shine is taking those elements and adding in way more organ music, and especially a heavy emphasis on bass and drums to the melodies, to give it a really meaty, almost dance floor sort of sound that makes passing the hours playing Demonschool an absolute joy. As an admittedly not so good bass player myself, I really do gotta say that I adore the bass line in a lot of these songs, especially when placed alongside the keyboard tunes and the organ music that makes a soundtrack that's part Claudio Simonetti, part Castlevania, and part dance floor bop that when put together creates a sound that is quintessential to Faye's fight against demonkind. And I gotta say, gang, if you want to support Kurt Feldman and pick up the soundtrack for yourself, I'll have a link down to his Bandcamp down below so you can enjoy it. That's pretty much all I gotta say about Demonschool, gang. It's just a small, scrappy little game with some pretty damn interesting ideas that are pretty novel. It's pretty damn clear what a lot of the influences are that went into Demonschool, but at the end of the day, when you add all those different influences together, you get such a damn cool and genuinely fun experience to go through that makes me want to be the first in line to see what our fine fiends at Necrosoft do next. While for some the game might be a little too quirky in areas, but if you're looking to play an old school tactical RPG that mixes the best of the genre together with awesome narrative elements, equally goofy and spooky, while playing it to the tune of a groovy soundtrack, then for 2025 this is going to be the only place that you can find that. So if you want to pick up Demonschool, you can grab it on all major consoles and platforms for about €22 or $33 Canadian. And there we go, that was Demonschool, and man, what a fun little way to start off this top 10 list, but this is but the beginning, so let's head on over to number 9.
Number 9.
Coming right in at number 9 is the latest entry in the Dream Surfing, Spin Kick, Launching, Streamer Simpin', and now Escape Room Escapin' investigative visual novel series I, the Somnium Files, with this year's No Sleep for Konami Date. In No Sleep for Konami Date, developed by the fine folks over at Spike Chunsoft, you play the role of, well, Konami Date, a special investigative agent for Abyss, the advanced brain investigation squad for the Tokyo Metropolitan Police, who sink into the dreams of others in order to find clues to solve murders, get to the bottom of disappearances, and so on. This time around, Date is racing against the clock in order to save Iris Sagan, a famous internet idol and streamer who has been abducted by an alien known as Akemi, who pits her in a series of escape rooms that Iris will have to escape through in order to not get killed. So with Iris trying to solve these escape games on the inside, and Date and friends on the outside helping her solve the riddles while also trying to get to the bottom of things and find out where Akemi has her hostage, the gang will test her investigative skills and patience against the clock so everyone can come back home in one piece. Man, No Sleep for Konami Date, it started off a little rough, but by the end it had won me over. So much so to the point that I honestly like it more than Nirvana Initiative, the last game in the I, the Somnium Files series. But One thing that I like about this game is that even though it's short, it adds some new mechanics, specifically the escape rooms, which, while it might be new for this series, it's kind of something that they've been doing a long time, and I love it the same. No Sleep for Konami Dante, just like the other Somnium games, are visual novels that basically have you going from spot to spot, chatting with individuals, combing the environment, and using your trusty AI ball, which is a nice little sentient cybernetic AI eyeball that can help you see more into the investigation. And Iba, the AI ball that Dante uses, is a longtime companion of him that sits in his left eye socket. Typically, the most important part of the investigation is a moment when all of the information that Date and Iba have gathered reaches a wall. From there, they will have to take the suspect or person of interest back to Abyss in order to get them hooked up to the sync machine, a device that allows an outside party to enter the respective Perseum's dreamscape, known as the Somnium, to gather clues and possible leads, since dreams are made up of images that we all have seen before. In the Somnium, Iba and Date have only 6 minutes to figure out what is going to happen, and every time that you move or perform an action, the timer goes down, leaving you with less and less time to get to the ultimate conclusion of that aspect of the case. Typically, the Somnium segments are these sort of forks in the road for the narrative, where if you interpreted the Somnium in a certain way, that will lead you down a certain conclusion that sends the narrative in a certain direction, and a differing interpretation sending you in its own direction, creating a spanning web of timelines and ideas that all neatly fit together to showcase a larger narrative. No Sleep for Konami Date, being a spin-off, has a pretty direct timeline that doesn't really go off the rails, and since there aren't that many different ways to interpret the Somniums, in this entry, Spike Chunsoft decided to add in the escape room segments to flesh out the experience. And largely, they have done a pretty decent job to make the experience a bit more interesting. In these sections, you control Iris in her dumbass bunny suit getup as you have to solve a series of puzzles to get out of the room that you're currently in. That could mean using your limited knowledge of the Sumerian Anunnaki conspiracy to use the right statues, to get the right vials to slowly but surely make your way out of the room, then being expanded into other escape rooms to include more characters, with more interactivity between them, where it gets to the point where you have to have one person solve this puzzle to hand it off to Iris, and that other person will fulfill the next part of the escape room. I especially enjoyed these sections because it is a stark reminder of the series creator Kotaro Uchikoshi's Zero Escape games, which were basically if you took the Saw films and then turned them into games with their own ideas of escaping the predicaments that the characters got themselves into. Now, I will say it doesn't really make up for the game's more linear nature, but at the end of the day, this is not a full-fledged Somnium Files game, so I can't really get too much grief for it, but it's enough to get you by. Moving on to the presentation, it is one of the few things that I like about the Somnium Files, and in No Sleep for Konami Date it's much the same in that it is a step above the rest of most visual novels that are usually just pretty 2D laden in presentation. An element that the Somnium games have over a lot of other visual novels is the full 3D animation and the fact that every single character is fully voice acted, which gives the presentation of the whole experience more production value as if it's a higher quality product. That's of course not to demean other games that don't have those elements, because at the end of the day, it's all about the quality of the narrative and the overall experience. But for the most part, No Sleep for Konami Date does a great job of showcasing all the characters with some neat designs and a neat soundtrack, which we'll get into. I especially love the new characters of Akemi, a strange alien from a faraway planet that oversees the escape rooms that Iris has found herself in, and the other newcomer being Hina Tsukiyono, an escape room loving engineer that works at Abyss who takes the role of the operator of the sync machine after the events of the first game. Starting with Akemi, she looks like this weirdo mascot where we have her exaggerated looks, the lizard's lower body and tail, and the most striking of which that she never gets tired in reminding the audience is her third eye that will need to open in order to solve the escape rooms. Hina, on the other hand, takes over for Pewter from the first game and, like taking after her mentor, rocks a ridiculous lab coat, skin-tight jumpsuit, and goofy-ass goggles, but all in a sort of fashion that makes her seem like her own character instead of just another gal. One small detail that I particularly like is that she's got like really striking pretty blonde hair that, apart from a certain Atami resort loving receptionist, Hina's the only really one in the game with hair like that. Now, another aspect of the presentation that I quite enjoy that I mentioned before is the soundtrack composed by Keisuke Ito, which has some really great new additions that I have already introduced to things like my other videos and even the Tomcast. Though on the whole, the new tracks might seem a little bit limited, but that's because that any of the locations from the prior two games use the tracks from, well, the prior two games. To start off, a track I really enjoy is called Strange Reptiles. That is the theme that plays for whenever Akemi shows up to announce the gist of the new escape room, and for one, I think it's a very fitting sound for her. In general, the soundtrack has a lot of great music that really utilize like really hard drums and kicks that cut through the sound, and another track that I love that does that is called Curse, which plays in one of the escape rooms, a track that whenever I played in my car on my way to work or while arriving to work, people would be like, "What the hell are you listening to? I didn't know you listened to drum and bass," which to be fair, I kind of like a bit of everything, but hey, if the track is good, well, then the track is good and I'm gonna listen to it in my spare time. Then moving on to the other end of the spectrum, we gotta slow down that tempo to a nice crawl with a track known as Decadent Now that plays during one of the syncs that has that floaty ambiance that cuts every so often with some longing saxophone, and it makes me want to get into my longest raincoat, loiter around a neon sign, and schmark some cigarettes while mentally going through a murder case. But all in all, gang, No Sleep for Kaname Date does, as always, a great job of being a high production value visual novel that always has a little something different, a little something strange, that other works just don't seem to have. And just like with Nirvana Initiative, the presentation is continuing on that same sort of at times vaporwavy road that you can never really get sick of.
And of course, gang, we gotta talk about the thing that actually makes No Sleep for Kaname Date a pretty fun experience, and that is, of course, the narrative. It's the story of all the characters and the mystery at the center of it all, of Iris being taken away by a UFO alien up into the sky. And even though it's a shorter game, it's still pretty damn good.
As already mentioned, gang, No Sleep for Kaname Date is a spin-off, so don't go expecting a full-ass Somnium Files title with a plethora of different routes, interpretations to interpret while within the Somnium that ultimately leads to culminating into story locks getting blown right open and a final conclusion, because you're not really gonna get that. Instead, what you'll be getting is a shorter, linear, albeit more concise experience that instead of having some grand conspiracy spanning years that you need to get to the bottom of, you'll be taking a microscopic look at the new characters that get introduced, and frankly, coming off of the exhaustive Nirvana Initiative, it's actually quite refreshing. One issue that I saw in Nirvana Initiative is that they added so many friggin' characters that by the end of it, it kind of makes your head spin. So with No Sleep for Kaname Date just focusing on these specific characters, you get to enjoy figuring out just what in the world makes them tick. That is, of course, not to say that we won't be enjoying a lot of the old characters from the prior two games, since they are, of course, still around, but largely the focus is on the new characters, as it should be. The only gripe is that while it is a shorter experience, clocking in at only maybe around 10 hours, I found that initially it took a little bit to get off the ground narratively till I was really invested, but by the time that the game is firing on all cylinders, you're figuring out just what the hell is the disappearance of an anchor woman from 3 years prior, has to do with an intergalactic wisdom taking an internet idol on a life or death escape room escapade, and you enjoy it all a whole lot more. And honestly, gang, I ended up liking it more than Nirvana Initiative by the end. Especially Hina, I grew to really enjoy as a character, and I hope that she shows up in the next title. But whenever the new title comes out, there are going to be so many damn characters that I have no clue on how they're going to deal with it one way or the other. But either way, I'm gonna be there.
So that's all I gotta say about No Source for Kaname Date, because it's such a small game, but brevity is one of its qualities because it doesn't take too long, it doesn't waste its time, it tells the story precisely how it means to do it, and it's a pretty damn good one, and one that I enjoyed more than the last one.
I don't really know what more to say, gang, other than it's another banger by the fine folks over at Spike Chunsoft, that if you like any of the prior games, there's really no reason why I wouldn't recommend that you play No Sleep for Kaname Date, and if you haven't played any of these games, then go check out my review on the first game, then you might find something that you might really enjoy.
Currently, you can pick up No Sleep for Konami Date from The Somnium Files, which is the actual full title that there was no way in hell I was going to be saying more than once. You can pick it up on PC, Switch, and as of this video, or soonish I think, on PlayStation and Xbox for €40 or $50 CAD. And I would highly recommend grabbing it to support a great studio.
And with that, we're done with number 9, but there are more nefarious and extravagant titles to consider. So with that, let's head on over to number 8.
Number 8.
Are you glad to see me, friend?
Coming in slow and spooky at number 8 is Chronos: The New Dawn, developed by the playful Poles over at Bloober Team, who just the year prior released the critically acclaimed Silent Hill 2 remake. Chronos takes place in a post-apocalyptic Poland where you play the role of the Traveler, a retro-futuristic dive suit-wearing agent that works for an enigmatic organization of remnant humanity known as the Collective, that has tasked the Traveler with reaching certain points in desolate Warsaw to go back in time to save individuals that were killed during a cataclysm that destroyed the world. From there, the Traveler with her special sidearm is tasked with traversing a destroyed world to make heads or tails of what caused the cataclysm known as the Change, and to try and fight off creatures known as orphans, which were humans that have been horrifically changed into body horror goopies whose only real goal to add you to its pulsating mass. With a future that isn't written in stone, it'll be up to the Traveler to go find the answers she seeks from the past and the remnants found in the ashes in the present.
Now I'm gonna need my little bit of rum handy because this is one of those titles that might be a little controversial because some people are gonna be like, what? How did this one make it in and Silent Hill F didn't? And the answer to that is that I would rather play something that's a little bit more derivative but actually does its thing well instead of something that I didn't want to play at all. So that's that.
Speaking of derivative, what some people have described Chronos as is a sort of Polish punk Dead Space, which while I wouldn't say that is entirely truthful, in terms of gameplay one can definitely see the comparisons. Basically, Chronos plays like a lot of other survival horror games these days by being an over-the-shoulder third-person shooter, where you have to use the tools at your disposals to fend off the nasty goopy fiends, and try to leave some stuff left over to upgrade the dive suit, the weapons the Traveler uses, or create more flame charges to burn the meanies to a crisp. Chronos will have you in a sort of future overworld that will slowly unlock new locations and threats to deal with, and then occasionally the Traveler will find a dive point where she can use her more specialized gear to go back into the past just before the events of the Change occur and try to extract a prospective target. These trips to the past are a lot more linear in scope, usually limiting you to a certain area of the locale that you just fought through in the future to extract the target to add to the Collective in the far future. But even while a bit more limited in gameplay options, you are rewarded with seeing the path the world was going down and further along the narrative. On the whole, I would say that the gameplay for Chronos is decent and mostly achieves the goal that it sets out to do, which is a solid survival horror experience that occasionally you might come across a bit of that Polish jank, especially when fighting the orphans where it can be a little bit finicky at first, but by the end of it you'll get used to it. If there was one thing I wish the fellas over at Bloober Team could have done, and honestly this could be said for a lot of survival horror games, is that I wish Chronos had a bigger emphasis on puzzle solving. You have this entire premise to be able to go backwards and forwards
forwards in time, you don't really do much with it in a gameplay sort of sense, apart from just moving some platforms around and reforming explosive barrels to blow up orphans against. But overall, gang, it does a really damn good job of just basically getting through the narrative and feeling the vibe of the game, which is one of my favorite things that you could be found in Chronos. So let's talk about the sights and the sounds. To start off, we should give a shout out to the composer of Chronos, which of course is the longtime Bloober team regular Arkadiusz Wrejkowski, or however you pronounce that Polish ass name, no offense, who has done the soundtracks for Layers of Fear, Observer, and my favorite of his being the soundtrack for The Medium, which he actually collaborated with Silent Hill's Akira Yamaoka for. In Chronos, the soundtrack follows the classic Wrejkowski specialties of taking that 80s darkwave synthetic sound that wouldn't be that far removed from a John Carpenter film and making it match with the visuals that are going on screen. Usually what this means is that you'll hear some droning, almost at time plucking synths fire away softly in the background while the traveler is sifting through the desolation, looking for materials or even another living entity that isn't congealed together into a mass of flesh. Then the soundscape breaking out into a full-blown synthetic melodies as you approach the vantage point of larger structures in the distance, or perhaps a dive point that's barely visible, marking the long road ahead to perform the jump to the past. But an element of the presentation that I really enjoyed is a lot of the visual designs that have been created for this world, because it's pretty sweet, taking elements of Polish communist era brutalism and then adding in a fair bit of that retro-futuristic, almost diesel-punky sort of flair that makes a lot of designs, whether that be the kind of Volvic design of the dive suit or the modular chargeable firearm that the traveler carries, all sort of point to a rugged design philosophy for items that are not just supposed to survive traveling through time, but also keep space as efficient as possible. I also really enjoyed the visual contrast between how the world looks in the present compared to how it does in the past. And since you're jumping back and forth all the time, there are a lot of opportunities to see the difference. One of my favorite ones is when you go back to an area that's full of apartment blocks with neon signs and heavy snowfall. In a technical sort of sense, the world was alive since it was before the calamity that destroyed it, but there's not even a single soul in sight, and it really gives you that dreadful feeling of a world on the brink of the end. All in all, the visuals mixed with the wonderful soundtrack by Wrejkowski create an experience of sifting through a world that's already lost, and that we're here to pick up the pieces to serve a monolithic entity without a face, devoid of all humanity, which fits the concept of the traveler, who is a monotone woman laser focused on her mission to extract targets from the past for the betterment of humanity. Chronos is one of those wonderful survival horror games that I really like because it's a slow burn. It lets you really soak in the mood and the world and the loneliness and how desolate the world is. Even basically echoing out the human element of it all, because the main character, the traveler, doesn't even have any human features. It's just a diving helmet. So much so that you gotta go back in time to go find the human element, which brings me to the narrative, and it's you add all of those elements together and you put it into a narrative about trying to find the truth that's hidden throughout the time stream, and you got yourselves a neat little story. The central mystery of Chronos: The New Dawn is figuring out just what in the hell happened to the world that caused the change, and how going back to the past to extract the individuals will alter the future to fix it into something that humanity can finally use to prosper. And while Chronos doesn't show all of its cards by the end, the slow, gradual dip feed of figuring things out was a hunt that I was surprisingly invested in and wanted to get to the bottom of. Searching the desolate waste to find the last dilapidated echoes of what used to be Poland, and then finding a lost cat to bring back to the sanctuary, coming across the remains of other travelers, always wondering what was the original purpose, who were they supposed to extract, and if perhaps you will meet the same fate. These are all aspects of the narrative that really intrigued me, and it was enough for me to keep going. But if you do keep going, you'll eventually be rewarded with finding other living beings that, like the spotlight being casted on a dark stage, it's so striking to actually deal with another living human being, whether that be the people that you meet in the past before the change, or the warden, who is another traveler from the collective that is sent to help maintain all of your weird tools and instruments that the travelers use to jump across time to maintain what's called the vocation.
Either way, gang, it almost wakes you up and reminds you for what purpose all the goopy monster fighting is for. That being said, if you're going into the experience thinking that the narrative is going to be the most groundbreaking and novel idea, then you're probably going to be disappointed. Same if you're heading into Chronos expecting a huge character drama or study, but if you go into it with the idea that you're going to slowly unravel a mystery of why the world ended and work with questionable entities to further save the memory of mankind, then I think you might actually really enjoy it. Which kind of brings us to the end here of Chronos the New Dawn, and man oh man, it's just one of those games that if you're feeling a sort of like retro-futuristic Polish Dead Space in 2025, then well, you can't find it anywhere else. It's only going to be found in Chronos the New Dawn. If there was ever a motto that I wanted to give for the year of our Lord 2025, it would be that there is a certain undeniable quality of a great story told well. And as we'll see and have already seen with the list so far, Chronos the New Dawn is another experience that when you put the time in to unravel is absolutely worth the price of admission. At the moment, Chronos the New Dawn can be found on all major platforms for around €60 or just under $80 Canadian, and will run through a decent weekend to play it, with my playthrough clocking in around 15 hours or so of doing the main narrative and then some other stuff on the side. Though if the price is a little steep, there is a demo available for you to enjoy and see what Chronos is all about. Only time will tell if Chronos the New Dawn will be able to stand the test of time and stand beside the other survival horror greats, no pun intended. But with that, we gotta make up for lost time and head on over to number 7.
Number 7.
Slotted in neatly on the 7th spot is the charmingly old school Stories from Seoul, The Gundog, developed by the scrappy small team of Space Colony Studios. Set in our local solar system on planetary calendar 214, it's been 4 years since the solar war has ravaged the system, and an uneasy peace has been established. You play the role of a newly appointed security officer in the Jovian Navy's rapid response vessel, the JFS Gundog. Reunited with his paramour and a bitter rival from the war, it's up to the security officer to make sure that the crew on board the Gundog are all safe and sound when they are sent on a clandestine mission to the edges of Jovian space. And if that mission goes wrong, it could spark another solar war. Oh boy, fellas, Stories from Seoul, The Gundog is one of those games that just takes you back to yesteryear with the PC98 classic aesthetic, and it is one of those games that it is pretty open about its influences, but when its influences are things like Macross, Mobile Suit Gundam, and Bubblegum Crisis, I really don't give a damn. You could be as open about it as you want. Reminiscing about 80s manime aside, this is one of those damn games that is pretty short, so I'm gonna be pretty brief about it in this part of the list, but regardless, let's talk about some Gundog. Since we've already covered a visual novel before with No Sleep for Konami Dante, I'll make this section brief by saying that the gameplay for Gundog might seem relatively primitive, what with its PC98 aesthetics, but that it actually has a few small things going for it. For the most part, you'll be traversing the Gundog looking for clues, learning about the situation the crew find themselves in, order a chocolate bar for your paramour, or speaking to the other characters, which could range from the wonderfully bubbly Lieutenant Commander Quinn, the aloof Captain Bartomuse, or even the muscle-bound Chief Engineer Cathes, who, as with most of these types of characters, have irreparably altered my brain chemistry. And while there is a general direction that you should be heading towards, for the most part, Gundog lets you do it at your own pace and rewards astute players that pay attention, since there are numerous opportunities that you can catch people out on a lie, or that second search of an area might catch the glimpse of something not quite right. Though unlike a lot of visual novels, Gundog doesn't really concern itself with tons of routes and choices that would get you an ending F with a slightly spicier CG if your favorite character is a reward, but instead, even though the ending of the game remains relatively the same, the circumstances of the characters and the reveals at the end change depending on how you play through Gundog. Which to me, ironically enough, is more meaningful choice and consequence than an ending that will lead nowhere. And I mean, sure, the sequel or the next game in the series will likely have a canon outcome, but Gundog goes about getting to these different conclusions from a gameplay perspective is relatively novel.
And while the gameplay variables might be a sort of hidden art for the Gundog, we should probably talk about the art.
From the get-go, we can see that Gundog lovingly and faithfully recreates the aesthetics of ye olde adventure games, visual novels, and RPGs of the PC-98, which was a Japanese home computer that was popular back before modern operating systems flooded the Japanese marketplace. I'm gonna be real, gang, in saying that my repertoire with the PC-98 is not very extensive, but with it being a Japan-only product, making the vast majority of the games for it still untranslated, and even with the ones that are translated, it doesn't take long to stumble across some pretty raunchy content. What I mean to say, without beating around the bush, and I must absolutely stress no pun intended in that one, is that a wide variety of the content on the PC-98 was of a, let's say, pornographic nature. But that doesn't mean that there weren't some gems to draw inspiration from, such as Snatcher and Police Knots, developed by the maestro Hideo Kojima himself, but also games like Slayer, Star Cruisers, and of course Viper CTR. The PC-98 aesthetics can be seen in these absolutely gorgeous pixel art, with simple but varied colors that curiously enough complement a military vessel since it should mostly appear uniform. And if the default look is a little too high def for you, there are a variety of different color palettes that you can select that change it to a more monochromatic look that harkens back to the classics. Or a doujin mode that makes it look a lot more amateur and aesthetic, and this one's pretty cute, I do like it. There are also, of course, the soundtrack that so lovingly recreates the crunchy, simple, yet beautiful sound of PC-98 classics, composed by Daniel Goodman, that serves for incredible window dressing in an environment that otherwise doesn't have a whole lot of sound going on, which was natural for a game of the period on the PC-98. I know this section is pretty short, but since the brevity is one of the qualities of the Gundog, being at around only 4 hours, it's one of those things that you should be able to see so far that the presentation is simple, gorgeous, and above all, charming as all hell.
Which brings us to my favorite element of the Gundog, and that is of course the narrative. And man oh man, what a bunch of horrible first days that you can have out in the Jovian reaches on your days of work. But work's gotta get done anyway, so let's talk about it.
It might not seem like much, but there's a genuine quality to the narrative of Gundog in the sense that in its short runtime of roughly 4 or so hours, it can introduce a setting, set the stage for the plot that occurs, and do some really neat things with the characters, with most of them having their own little arcs. If you're a fan of some of the classic anime works out there like say Super Dimension, Fortress Macross, Mobile Suit Gundam, and even some other sci-fi OVAs from the 80s like Bubblegum Crisis or Cyber City 0808, then you'll have seen the story in these characters all before in one way or another. And I do think that the story of the crew of the Gundog and their clandestine mission to the reaches of Jovian space is pretty novel. But you'll probably feel like you've seen this before, as if it was like, did I see an OVA tape of that like ages and ages ago? Like that's probably what it's gonna make you think. And honestly, that's completely fine, since the fellas over at Space Colony Studios are very open about what their influences are and how it inspired them to make something as cool as the Gundog. But the part of the narrative that I really enjoy with Gundog is a lot of the character writing that goes on in such a short time. The Gundog itself is considered a sort of dead-end position for those within the Jovian Navy, a sort of spot that you throw all of your undesirables that have too many issues to be commanding and crewing ships in the fleet, but still competent enough that it would be a genuine waste to throw them out of the Navy wholesale, especially after the devastating Solar War. Because of that, every single character has their own quirks and issues that for one reason or another have placed them in the situation that they are currently in. It could be that they gave a horrible command that got their flight wing wiped out in the war, or in the case of the protagonist, he was the only one in his flight wing that wasn't able to launch in a pivotal battle above the moon, causing scorn amongst his peers, or something as simple as representing the ship engineers union so damn well and being a thorn to the Navy that they just kind of throw you into a relative closet of the JFS Gundog and call it a day. And throughout the narrative, while all the events in the intrigue are occurring, depending on how you go about it with the choices at hand, a lot of these characters will have their own little journeys that can make them feel all the more human than just a collection of mecha genre cardboard cutouts that we've all seen before. And especially once the plot really gets going and you start to figure out just what the clandestine mission was about, and the dangers of this being so far away from home base and just exactly why everyone is on the Gundog, it can be a really enjoyable ride, and honestly, I can't wait for whatever Space Colony Studios is gonna do next.
Like I previously said, gang, there is a certain quality to a great story told well, and this is just one of those examples, and it's a game that really resonated with me on a narrative sense because it just has all of the things to tickle my geezer ass manime mecha loving geezer ass. And so it tickles all those sensibilities, and it was a fun ride to go through, and I really enjoyed it.
I always love to see the passion that devs in these small indie studios, like the fellas over at Space Colony Studios, have, not just for the art that they are creating, but a love for all of the little bits and pieces that we tend to forget that makes us who we are. All the little influences from all the things that we love coming together to make something so wholly unique that I can say once again, there really isn't anything else like it in 2025. So with that, Stories from Seoul, the Gundog can be found on PC, Nintendo Switch, and PlayStation consoles for the humble price of €15 or $20 CAD. And while it might seem a little bit steep, I believe that these guys deserve every damn penny, because with it, we might just get that continuation that I'm desperately craving.
Hey, we're 2 for 2 for visual novels on this list, and something tells me this might not be the last one. But regardless, gang, we gotta head on over now to number 6.
Number 6.
5 years after the release of 2020's The Citadel, Japanese single dev extraordinaire Doi Kuramori comes with its sequel Beyond Citadel, that once again puts us into the hyper scantily clad shoes of the martyr, to once again do the most horrific, awful things that you can think of to poor, cute, brainwashed anime cuties, all the while wondering where you dropped that last magazine for the rifle. Set after the events of the first Citadel, Unit 919, also known as the Martyr, has returned to defeat the Trumpeters of the Apocalypse, who have enslaved a large part of remnant humanity to fulfill a hidden purpose that was given to them, of which we will certainly find out throughout the journey. So she's gonna have to get her magazines in order, load up those shotgun tubes, and figure out a bunch of really technical gun nut stuff for a first-person shooter in order to defeat the Trumpeters, or something I don't know. I kinda honestly don't know how to do the bumper on this one.
Hoo-wee, gang. Every year there is a game on this list that is a controversial pick. And this year it's gonna be Beyond Citadel, because usually every game on this list is a game that I can recommend to everybody. Beyond Citadel, this is a game that I wouldn't recommend to everybody, but for those I would recommend, you're gonna have a good time playing this game.
Before I get to talking about the gameplay of Beyond Citadel, I do have to give a disclaimer, and this is probably the only one you're gonna see in this entire list, but Beyond Citadel has a lot of content that for some people can be deeply upsetting, specifically because of the highly graphic, sexual, and violent content of the game. What I mean to say is, and I will talk about it a lot more in the presentation and narrative section, is that many people consider Beyond Citadel to be what's called an errrr game, which stands for errrr, aka erotic, and guru, aka grotesque, which means that it really ramps up the juxtaposition between sensual, sexualized elements of its art and more macabre, grotesque elements. And this is a key here, while Beyond Citadel isn't eroguro, it's still without a doubt the most gory and sexualized game that's going to be on this list. First of all, in this section, I do kind of want to set the record straight in saying that Doi Kuramori has explicitly said that he is not an eroguro artist, and that his interest lies in dark sci-fi and how biomechanism will alter the human body in the future. Something to the tune of mixing Ghost in the Shell with H.R. Giger-ass art, which are incredible sources of inspiration to draw from, but the fact that many people have to do this stupid song and dance and accuse Doik-san of being a whole lot of terrible things that he isn't is kinda honestly deeply upsetting. And so at least on Tomthechosen1, I'm gonna put my damn foot down and defend the guy, cause he deserves it. I will say though, it definitely leans a lot more on the grotesque side, since when you take a shotgun and blast someone, it's going to graphically splatter and give them all over the place. But there is also a lot of the former in the sexual content, and especially in a narrative sense, they touch on some subjects that can be very upsetting. So of course, your discretion is advised and all that.
Now that half of you have clicked off this video or jumped ahead to another part of the video and irredeemably labeled me as a horrendous sex pervert, I will say now that we should probably talk about something that I am probably a wonderful sleaze for, and that is firearms, because man oh man, back in Canada I used to shoot quite a lot of guns. And one of the things I love about the gameplay of Beyond Citadel is that it has all the nitty-gritty details of how you handle guns and does it in such a way that it actually is fun to play.
For starters, Beyond Citadel is one of the very many classical boomer shooters out there that take the mechanics and aesthetics of shooters of yesteryear such as Doom, Duke Nukem, Blood, or with today's case, Marathon, and putting a twist on it in interesting ways that makes it a unique experience. The most important element of the gameplay is that compared to a lot of its boomer shooter peers is that Beyond Citadel has some really in-depth mechanics when it comes to the handling and ergonomics of the weaponry that the martyr uses. For instance, there's a whole systems of buttons to load, cock, and shoot the firearms, with each weapon not just having a form of secondary fire, but also quote-unquote realistic ballistics in that each firearm has their own proper bullet drop and damage drop at length. Which means that weapons that are not firearms but something more akin to a direct energy weapon like a laser or a flamethrower have their own properties, like the laser shooting straight pretty much till it hits something and the flamethrower sticking to whatever surface it gets shot at and making quick work of it. These mechanics also extend to the magazines, where you have to pay attention to see if you have a spare magazine for the gun that you're using, but mercifully the magazines in your backpack get reloaded automatically so you don't have to worry about that. And hell, even some weapons, if you're missing a magazine, you can just load in single rounds, like with the anti-material rifle or even the shotgun, which you can load all the way to fill the tube and then throw in a slug in the barrel as your +1. Now for the fellas out there that want a more vanilla boomer shooter experience, there are a staggering amount of options in regards to the handling of the weapons, and even whether or not if the weapons can jam, which might seem annoying, but the whole system is actually pretty damn intuitive. And honestly gang, for the most part, unless it's something like Arma where it's more of a simulation, I tend to not really like in-depth mechanics for the handling of firearms in games. They always tend to make things more difficult and unintuitive than it is in real life to load a magazine into a pistol, rack the slide, and then pull the trigger, but thankfully Beyond Citadel has some really intuitive inputs that after a little while, it makes it second nature. What this means from a gameplay perspective is that it really changes how you play the game from the beginning, and then it develops as it gets closer to the conclusion across the 7 episodes of roughly 6 chapters each, including a boss fight that caps off the chapter. Essentially, Beyond Citadel starts off way more tactical, and where you are conscious of all the weapons that you have, how much ammunition you have for them, and because of the mechanics, you're playing almost defensively, like tactically clearing out every single room and every enemy, grabbing their stuff amongst the viscera, and then slowly but surely getting better and better and more natural to defeat the cohorts of the trumpeters. But eventually you really get the hang of things and you become way more proficient in an ever-growing arsenal of weapons at your disposal, with new or alternate versions of some weapons being included that give you more options to play. And by the end of the game, in the later chapters, it turns into a crazy friggin' boomer shooter that one would come to expect, but in comparison to a lot of its peers, it feels way better to play through. Like when you end up becoming that crazy shooter god at the end of the game, it really feels warranted because you started from nothing. It also helps that farther along in Beyond Citadel, the more movement mechanics they add on to make the martyr more agile and different, and then putting you in different scantily clad holy leather straps over Buba that have their own gameplay effects. But of course, for the gang out there that requires something less titillating, there are full suits of armor that you can equip that will help protect the martyr. In the end, all these elements come together to make Beyond Citadel the most engaging and fun shooter of 2025, and even ends up outcompeting some other shooters that came out there that were pretty friggin' high profile, but ultimately I kind of found disappointing. But Beyond Citadel is a whole lot of friggin' things, but the one thing it isn't is disappointing. But don't let me just ramble on and on about the gameplay. How about instead we let the game do the talking? Okay, gang, now I think it's about time that we talk about the elephant-sized pile of viscera in the room, and that is, of course, the presentation of Beyond Citadel. But even though you think it's pretty nasty, there's a lot going for it that's actually really interesting. Now, I know that if I got into the soundtrack or a lot of the aesthetics and how they were influenced by games like Marathon, you guys are probably going to still listen to me, but with the same sort of distraction and maybe even concern if I was saying this all with a live leak watermark above my head. So it's best to get the gruesome out of the way first. To start, Beyond Citadel, as you have probably seen with the gameplay, is a pretty damn gory game. Is it the goriest game that I've ever played? No. But the manner it depicts the viscera, what with the details and the lengths that it goes to humanize your enemies in death, is quite extensive and is the bulk of where some people might not indulge. If you've ever played games or mods like Brutal Doom, then you know what you're getting yourself into, but the element that might make it most upsetting for people is the fact that the horrendous and gruesome violence is happening to basically cute, cybernetically brainwashed anime girls and probably femboys, but you wouldn't be able to tell what with their arms blown off and their guts spilling with no appendages to hold them in.
Like, it's one thing when you're fighting some uber demon and he blows up into guts and viscera, or you rip his head off like a doll. It's another thing when you shoot your rifle at some goon's head and it splatters her head across the wall behind her, and you look at the cadaver and you realize that she was actually quite beautiful before there was a huge gaping hole in her eye socket. But moving on from the nasty gross shit, there's also the more titillating part of Beyond Citadel that we usually see with the martyr, who, if we look down, we can see her chest and deliciously thick thighs, with only a small strap covering things and not leaving too much to the imagination. But admittedly, there's a lot less sexually explicit elements of Beyond Citadel, at least visually, especially in comparison with the gore. Either way, gang, just like with the gameplay toggles that remove manual cocking or reloading of the guns, there are toggles that can turn off the gore or cover up a lot of the more sexually explicit materials for those that don't have the stomach for this sort of stuff, no pun intended. But I do have to say that a lot of the art of Beyond Citadel has to do with the fact that it is this juxtaposition between you doing something fun kinesthetically, as in shooting guns and having a lot of fun blowing enemies apart, and then realizing what you've actually done. So it is my recommendation that if you are looking to indulge in Beyond Citadel, that you keep these toggles turned off.
Basically, I think it's actually really neat and novel that there are so many options to use for your heart's content, whether that be limiting some of the parts of the experience that might be a bit more unsavory for some of you guys, or some of the more hardcore elements when it comes to the game, whether it be the press X to rack the bolt back sort of kind, or the XXX kind, but Anyways, we should probably talk about the other aspects of the presentation that I really do love, which is some really interesting visuals and a neat sort of soundtrack that you don't typically see with these sorts of first-person shooters.
The visuals of Beyond Citadel for a boomer shooter actually has a lot going for it, ranging from beautifully lonely vistas and locales in negative space, towering monolithic structures that wouldn't feel out of place in a Wolfenstein game, and a lot of the designs both for the human and not so human characters have both a tragic but oddly beautiful melding of flesh and machine. There's something so beautifully tragic in a lot of the visuals of the enemies that you fight. The melding of flesh and steel is cold, grotesque, and even cruel. But there's a purpose to the design that can only be described as divinely inspired, that you can't help but feel pity for them, like a last-ditch desperate humanity trying to close the gap between the mortal and the divine. The same sort of feeling can be seen in a lot of the environments that the martyr finds herself in, such as the opening area just outside of the eponymous citadel, a large sweeping valley with nothing but whales trying to consume you, and pillars of salt where people used to stand, the moment that they were punished by the angels for defying the natural order of things. For me, these sorts of environments, both in their beautiful desolation, the solitude, and at times the strangeness of their construction, remind me of two different pieces of media, those being Bungie's Marathon, especially Marathon 2 Durandal, and the Manime classic Neon Genesis Evangelion, not just because of the visuals of the weird locales such as the serene sea where the ruins of old Tokyo were, but also in the use of biomechanical monstrosities as humanity's last hope. And honestly, gang, if I wanted to point out the influences, we would kind of be here all damn day, and I really just wanted to say that the influences that Doi Kuramori used to create the world of Citadel is quite extensive and incredibly well researched, but it's more than the sum of all of its parts. There's especially a lot of elements that have to do with Christianity and Catholicism, what of the imagery and metaphors of the angels, the trumpeters of the apocalypse, and even very many things that kind of bring about the ecstasy of sacrifice. But that is a story for another day. But now that we have the visuals out of the way, we should touch on the soundtrack for Beyond Citadel, since the situation concerning both the first game and the sequel is kind of odd, but it ends up working anyways. To start off, I will say that the soundtrack for Beyond Citadel is in a weird spot where you can't really get it into a single package, and that has a lot to do with the fact that a lot of the soundtrack is actually license-free or royalty-free music that wasn't actually composed by Doi Kuramori, and comes from Dova Syndrome, which is a production label for smaller scale Japanese artists that help get their music out into the world, and the vast majority of its soundtrack comes from Dova Syndrome. But in the midst of this sea of music from Dova Syndrome stands 12 tracks from the composer Mothman47, and the story behind his inclusion into the overall soundtrack is a pretty damn cool one for showcasing the incredible amount of passion that fans have for the Citadel.
Mothman47 has so far created 3 concept albums that have us peer through the veil into the world of the martyr and her struggles against first the sleeping god and now the trumpeters. As for his foundation of inspiration, Mothman really took the juxtaposition and the weight of the world and themes illustrated, as well as the juxtaposition of hope within sorrow, even if that hope is fleeting and insignificant in comparison. That it's really about all the little moments in between, and I really do have to agree with that, because the little moments where you're there by yourself and you really recognize just how alone and desolate you are in this world, it's actually the most beautiful and the most profound. But probably my favorite part of this entire tale is that Mothman47 gave these concept albums as a personal gift to Doekura Mori, and that he could use the albums and their tracks however he pleased. Completamente gratis, which means to say that Mothman47 is a huge friggin' G for doing what he does, and goes to show just how passionate the fans are for this game and its setting. So this initial fountain of inspiration to make a concept album has now grown to 3 at this point, in time culminating with the inclusion of some of his tracks specifically from the second concept album, Apotheosis Encode, getting into the soundtrack of Beyond Citadel, which is actually pretty damn cool. And these 12 tracks fit so damn well into the world that Doekura Mori has created that honestly, if I hadn't gotten into contact with Mothman47 and been pointed the way to what each track is and where it is and where I could found it, I would have thought that either it was all Dova Syndrome or that all the tracks for the game were composed by Mothman47. Because in the end, all the tracks have some elements that they have in common, and it's that they share the same sort of melancholy that is baked into the world of Beyond Citadel. Going from the main theme that's this beautiful piano sonata to some of the more ambient tracks that Mothman has created, and no matter the track, the main takeaway I get from the whole soundscape is peace, calm, solitude, and melancholy. The martyr inhabits a dying world, one where the natural order of things was so irreparably destroyed that only remnants of all sides are fighting each other in the ashes of the world that was, and that's what paints the whole experience. So while it might have been a pain in the butt to source the soundtrack and how each piece fit into place together neatly, with me literally having to contact the co-composer to figure out some of his work out, it was very much worth it in the end to be able to go back and then listen to the soundtrack and reminisce and think about all the work that went into it.
What's kind of funny is that, like, I heard the main track for this game in like a sushi / like Japanese restaurant one time, and you know, you think whatever of it. Then you play the game, it's like, hey, I think I've heard this at like a sushi place before. And then after playing this game and ingesting it and loving it, I returned to some other sushi place and that same main piano theme was being played there, and I thought, hey, that's from Beyond Citadel, and I loved it. And it's like, it's one of those things where it changes how you look at things, and it's wonderful. But huge shout out to Mothman47. You're friggin' awesome, man. Thanks a lot for all the help with the soundtrack and trying to figure out like heads or tails of it, because it was a bit difficult in just the general situation, what's going on there. But it was really cool talking to you, and thanks for helping me out. Your passion for this is infectious, and it's wonderful. So glad that you reached out. So thanks. For all the fellas out there, the soundtracks and the Bandcamp for Mothman47 stuff is going to be down in the description. Go and give that a listen, because he deserves all the support that you can give him, because he's a wonderful guy. But moving on, we'll talk about the final element of this, and this is the narrative of Beyond Citadel. And Beyond Citadel's story, it's one of those where it says a whole lot by not saying a whole lot at all. So let's talk about it.
Fellas, I previously mentioned that a lot of the big influences that went into the creation of the Citadel and its sequel was the ye old Bungie first-person shooter Marathon, and its sequels that instead of telling a story using cutscenes and spoken dialogue, since it was the mid-90s after all, but the story was mostly told through terminals that you found throughout the game. Similarly, Beyond Citadel drip feeds its stories through loading screen, terminals detailing some of the events of the game, and with brief interactions with the other survivors, and machine angels at the Citadel fighting desperately for humanity. But with each new morsel of information comes a price that needs to be paid, and that is the price of innocence, or I guess initially perceived innocence of the world, because the further that you get into the narrative, you come to realize just how damned of the world humanity has found itself in this setting. And frankly, gang, a lot of the narrative as you piece it together and come to understand it can be quite upsetting in subject matter, dealing with a lot of grotesque, almost Greco-Roman levels of sexual hyperviolence that sets the stage for the motivation of the martyr's journey. And throughout the journey, you'll really question just what in the hell all this carnage is for. Inversely, there are the forces of the trumpeters that are largely unthinking automatons. Because of the cybernetics that are required to live on a doomed Earth, it allowed malign forces to psychically and cybernetically brainwash the masses. So these poor souls have lost all individuality in reasoning long ago. So in a way, you feel terrible for what needs to be done to them, to tear them apart limb from limb simply because they have been brainwashed and are fighting you is genuinely tragic, because even with all of the brainwashing, even with half the body being replaced by cybernetics, some to the point of barely being more than a dumpy stumpy with a torso and head, at the end of the day, these people are still human, and the loss of human life is still tragic. And that is where the grotesque elements really kick in, is that this is a game that violently holds a mirror up to your face and tells you, like, this is what you've done. This is the violence that you have brought on these poor souls. Even if they aren't brainwashed and you're doing it largely in self-defense, it is something that you have to come to terms with. And especially as you get more and more into the martyr's story and figuring out what's going on, you really kind of will question. It's like, oh shit, I don't think I'm doing these for the right reasons. Which honestly, gang, at the end of the day is what resonated with the journey in Beyond Citadel for me. It is an incredibly sad and tragic journey of the continual dehumanization of the world that was divinely created, juxtaposed with the desolate, peaceful landscapes that shows that even amongst the solitude of a world long deemed lost, there's still something worth fighting for, and there's always hope to be found for those that seek it, even if the price to pay is the price that the martyr has paid.
What's funny about Beyond Citadel, fellas, is that it's one of the few games that honestly makes me wish I was more eloquent in the human language, because writing this section of the video, it basically just made me feel like I've been rambling up and down about how the game gets a bad rap and stuff like that, when really, to me, it was one of the most reflective experiences that I've had this year. It's just like the nasty, the brutality, the sadness, the desolation, all of that was just so... It made me really think and be pensive and reflective in those moments, and so I really appreciate it for that. It was really powerful.
Beyond Citadel is an incredible experience of juxtapositions, of contrasting the beauty of the human form with the coldness of the machine, of vicious firefights followed by the sound of crashing waves once the last case hits the floor, of witnessing a vast starship rain bombardment down on the enemies of desperate humanity, while a sonata plays in the background, and all of it together is the funeral dirge for the end of the world. But just like it says on the poster for the end of Evangelion, the beauty of destruction is the joy of rebirth. So perhaps there is some hope left in the world for those that seek it, whether it be the hope that whatever comes next will be better for the world that God has created, or the hope that if we endure our own personal hells that we might come out on the other side to see the rainbow or a ray of light once thought lost. And we have Doiksan to thank for creating not just one of the most fun boomer shooters in years, but also a narrative and setting that the deeper you dig, the more there is to find, with the respect to the audience that while the content might be grotesque, cruel, and upsetting in a variety of ways, he trusts us as adults to take in what he has to tell us as genuine human people. Which is why I believe he's one of the more misunderstood developers in the boomer shooter genre, and that honestly the accusations and slander that have been leveled against him are not just entirely wrong, but needlessly cruel for someone whose only wish is to showcase to the world the beauty that he has created. Which leads me to the final thing that I want to say about Beyond Citadel, and damn, it's about time because this section is really fat. But that thing that I want to say is that it might be hard to believe, but it's actually completely okay that a piece of art makes you uncomfortable. It's okay if the subject matter is upsetting and makes you want to reflect and think about what is going on and what you as the player, a creature with agency, has done.
And even at the end of the day, if you can't handle the material, that's completely fine. But don't go around disparaging artists for something they ain't, just because you're not comfortable with being uncomfortable. Me, on the other hand, since I am a self-admitted freak and love me some art that makes me deeply uncomfortable, will continue to indulge in the incredible world that Doi Kuramori has created. And for other willing indulgers of fine dining, so far you can only really find Beyond Citadel on Steam for the humble price of €15 or $20 Canadian. And it took me around 15 or so hours to go through all of the content that the game have to offer, and it was so absolutely worth it. Once more, gang, I'm going to be real. This was the most difficult part of the top 10 to write because it was one of those I rewrote over and over and over again because it's one of those games that it gets a bad rap and it's not fair at all. And it deserves all of the flowers that it gets. And just because an experience might be a little like hardcore, it might make you upset. That's okay, and it's okay to feel those feelings. And so this is a game that Doi Kuramori, he deserves all the flowers in the world, and you should give this game a try if it interests you. So I highly recommend that. Once again, huge shout out to Mothman47. You're a cool dude. Thanks a lot for chatting. It was really awesome, and it's nice to see through you and also learning through other aspects of the fan base just how passionate all the fans are for the Citadel and Beyond Citadel and the world that Doi Kuramori created, because it's a nice, beautiful world. So it was glad to be able to indulge in that end. And so once again, the link to Mothman47's Bandcamp is down there. Go listen to the concept albums. They're beautiful to listen to. And I've been listening to them on my commute to and from and work all the time. And they're beautiful. They're beautiful tracks. So give them a listen. But from now on, we got to head on over to the top 5 of our top 10. And these are all games that basically on their own right, they could have been Game of the Year. Any one of them, just straight up. But there can only be one. So with that, let's head on over to number 5.
Number 5.
Is that what you really want, son? No matter how many people you kill, you can't change what's happened.
Oh, dentes fortuna juvat!
What does that actually mean?
Fortune favours the brave.
All we have to do is deliver a letter to Lord Otto von Bergov and ride back again. So I wouldn't expect much excitement there.
Hans, look at me! For the love of God!
My boy, war is a nasty business. And it is better to have your head on your neck and your foe on his knees than the other way around.
These days we have all sorts of vagabonds, drifters, outlaws, and bandits roaming the country. I urge you all to be vigilant. You know who I am!
Oh, come on, gang. You guys knew that eventually I would have to put this damn game on the list, and after going through the heavy themes and subject matter of the prior entry, I think it's high time for something with a little bit of levity. So, set merely a few days after the events of the First Kingdom Come: Deliverance, we're once again in the shoes of Henry of Skalitz, who with the wonderfully pompous Sir Hans Capon of Pirkstein are on a quest to receive a lord's aid during the Bohemian crisis of the early 15th century. When after a fateful skirmish, Henry and Sir Hans have to start from nothing once again. So will our hapless goons be able to eke out a living from the pits of late medieval Bohemia? Will Henry finally be able to enact revenge on his father's killer and get back the final sword that they forged together? And most importantly of all, when in the hell is Tom gonna stop grave robbing people?
After narrowly missing out
the last Kingdom Come Deliverance game on my top 10, there was no way I was gonna miss the sequel to it. And man, oh man, what a market improvement over the first game. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, or from now on KCD 2, because there ain't no way in hell I'm saying that every single damn time, doesn't seem to change a whole lot from the gameplay for the first one, but add on to it with a few different mechanics, refine the ones that are already there, and just generally enhance the experience, and every way to make it a better game to play. For those unaware, KCD is an open world RPG that is probably most similar to the Elder Scrolls series, but instead of having alien and outlandish concepts like magic, lizardmen, and skooma, they have even more alien and outlandish concepts such as bathing, checks, and schnapps to save your game. Essentially in KCD, just like with the Elder Scrolls games, you increase your levels and skills by actively partaking in using those skills. So you'll increase those skills in, say, using a sword when you whack a human over the head with a longsword, or sneaking around and not being seen will increase your stealth, and asking around town why the Chamberlain likes to get punished like a good little boy in bed will increase your scholarly pursuits. Somehow. But unlike Elder Scrolls, there are a few more mechanics that they add on, like making sure that you're well fed and well rested to make the best use of your skills. Heading to the bath to make sure you look good and don't stink of the corpses that you've been robbing for a few spare groschen, much to the chagrin of others, and a pretty robust persuasion system and haggle system that is probably one of my favorite elements of the game. I especially loved having to create different outfits for different situations. You have your typical armor that you'll use when you need to get into a kerfuffle, some really nice noble's clothes when you want to convince the highwayman that you'll actually be the one to take his boots, and some more darker attire for when you need to do some more, let's say clandestine activities, such as sneaking in and robbing the country folk blind. And these different outfits will all come in very handy, especially in conversation, since there are a variety of different speech checks that you can do to persuade someone. You can use your slick tongue to beguile them, appeal to your noble virtues to give a position of authority, threaten them with bodily harm if they're being particularly stubborn, and so on. So naturally, if you're wearing armor and you show up to chat up some noble single and ready to kringle daughter, you're not really gonna do so damn well than if you came in with your finest clothes that you recently stole from some noble that got owned by a bunch of bandits. Similarly, if you show up to the miller who's trying to construct a golem out of sacks of grain and start talking about sneaky beaky shit with your bookworm ass glasses, you're gonna get laughed at. But it really is all these little attention to details in the quest design that I enjoy the most. For instance, whenever you need to pass a speech check, I do believe that every option has their own threshold to go over, with some avenues that are context sensitive being better to pursue instead of just telling them, think how pretty you look with this dress on as you're hoarding yourself out to the Chamberlain right by the pillory, which goes to show how well crafted the quests and the quest lines are when there are usually more than a few ways that you can go about fulfilling your objectives. Such as, for instance, there's a big wedding near the beginning of the game that you need to get into, and in order to make your case to the local lord, you can get an invitation by either helping the local blacksmith forge a great sword, or helping the miller stage a heist for a very specific piece of esoterica, gypsy swindler and all. Choice is really the name of the game when it comes to KCD 2, and I gotta say, gang, that if you are one of those people that really miss or enjoy that sort of Elder Scrolls experience, the sort of like wandering into a new town, seeing what's off in the distance, and like going around town, picking up quests, doing the quest lines like that in a very natural sort of like wanderlusty sort of way, you're gonna feel right at home with Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. But of course, it's the why we do these things, and Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 has such a wonderful narrative that, while it's not the craziest out there, it puts you into the world of medieval Bohemia, and it does such a great job of doing that. Writing for a lot of KCD is not going to be the most groundbreaking thing out there, but on the whole, it has achieved a pretty noble task of immersing you into the world of early 15th century Bohemia. You'll be learning in the most natural of ways what all the different factions and aspects of medieval society are, and how they all work together in conjunction, or in discord, to create the world that you live in. But if there's one way that I could describe the writing for KCD 2 is that it's homely and grounded. grounded. A lot of the quests will be on learning about what the medieval Bohemians believed of their neighbors, what the heck is a golem, figure out which person cursed their pigs when it was really just poisoned water, and so on, and the interactions between people share that same tone. For instance, there's a quest that you can do early on for the Lord of Semine that has you going on a road trip to find a stolen cart full of goods from the blacksmith, and the entire quest line is like listening to these two old geezers talk with Henry. And throughout the whole thing, it brought a smile to my head since it honestly just feels like hanging out with your grandpa. And it's so nice and warm, and it just brought a level of joy that I didn't really quite expect. It's just one of those quests where you wish you could just sit there and listen to these two geezers talk it out forever. And many of the interactions in KCD are that way. I would say that the vast majority of the people in medieval Bohemia would be as they are now, and being genuinely honest people looking to make it through another day, and there's a refreshing sincerity to a lot of the people. That even though the context of the quest itself is rather mundane, I was heavily invested in the plight of the people involved because they behaved and felt like real people. That is of course not to say there aren't more outlandish aspects to the narrative. There are certainly the goofy-ass interactions between Henry and Sir Hans Capon that so wonderfully feel like some sort of medieval frat boy movie, and the back and forth bickering of old friends between the two is genuinely charming, especially when Henry has to get hands out of a pickle every 2 seconds. So, I once again, and not for the final time, must stress the genuine quality of a great story told well, and KCD is one of the many games on this list that might not be the most revolutionary, but its attention to detail to immerse yourself into the world of early 15th century Bohemia is refreshing to the point that it can make it so high on this damn list.
Kind of like a Bethesda game, like I was saying earlier, is that KCD2 is one of those games where like you just go off into a direction and you figure out what kind of story you're going to talk about that day. What kind of a story are you going to experience? What goofy quest line are you going to get into? How many times are you going to get caught grave robbing if you're me? And I'm a piece of filth and I love grave robbing, but it's funny because like my Henry is the exact opposite of me. He's like the nastiest, worst person on the planet. Still chivalrous, but he ain't above digging graves, so I really did like that about him. But one of the aspects that I loved about KCD2 is the presentation of it, because it's one of those games where it's just like, it just puts you in that world. It puts you into medieval Bohemia and you go, wow, shit didn't change at all.
I'm gonna be real, gang. A pet peeve of mine that I absolutely hate that I have with a lot of period films or games is that they always use this juvenile and frankly absurd view of the ages of old, especially the Middle Ages, that makes everything look disgusting, drab, and horrendously gray. When the reality is that the world was just as green, if not even more green, and that the people of those periods enjoyed a wide selection of colors. Like seriously, when every single movie or show has to have a nasty ass blue filter and be so drab and gray that you want to gouge out your friggin' eyes, you just know that the hands of a perfidious Englishman made it. Such as my favorite senile old man who should be diddling kids more than he diddles established properties, Ridley Scott. But thankfully for the world and all things created in his divine image, we have the Czechs that have finally decided that their game deserves some proper damn color. And it is not just to lovingly capture the bountiful green beauty of the Bohemian countryside, but also insert the love of the Middle Ages into all aspects of the art design, ranging from the wonderful rabbits that are used for when you're sneaking around or trespassing, the maps themselves looking like something from a medieval manuscript, the like little seals and scrolls that you do when you hover over an item in the overworld, and generally just a love for the setting that can be seen everywhere and is rather infectious. We can also see this love and enjoyment for the Middle Ages in a lot of the music that can be found on the soundtrack for Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, especially when they use the instruments of the era, of which my favorite are the classic lute, some flutes, and the ever-present hurdy-gurdy that every time I hear one I want to go and pick one up until I see the price of them, and the fact that like half of them are from like one workshop in Ukraine now producing drones instead to blast scum sky high is kind of a tragedy. Though I do gotta say fellas that if I were to sit here and wax poetic of the soundtrack, we'd probably be here all damn day, since the soundtrack composed by John Banta, who reprises his role from the first game, came back to compose for 2, created a monstrous 400-track, 10-hour-long soundtrack that runs the gambit from music that you hear at a bohemian wedding, subtle but adventurous tracks when you're skulking through the forest, looking for your next shallow grave to rob, and a little bard tune from the butt trumpet of all places. I especially find it interesting that he's basically composing music made for that era in the compositions that were used by people, so like a troupe of musicians or a madrigal of singers, and then using modern composing techniques to make something that is more fitting to be used in a modern media project. But on the whole, gang, the visuals and the sounds, from a painted shield with the noble family's heraldry, to the sound of a snorting pig happily rolling in a pile of dirt, to the whimsical tunes on a flute, create an experience that feels genuine and sincere to the source material. That frankly, we're all pretty lucky that the folks over at Warhorse Studios care so much to provide us with such a gem.
All in all, gang, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is one of those games that I would call a perfect sequel. Not to say that it's a perfect game, but basically it improves over the first in every single tangible way, to a point that it is just a marked improvement over the first game. And honestly, it deserves the flowers that they get.
I frequently used to joke on the first Kingdom Come Deliverance that using a sword or any kind of melee weapon in that game was just straight up easier to use in the real world because of the obtuse combat system, but that is just one of the many things that they have simplified and improved for the better in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. I'm still gonna say that the blacksmithing minigame is freaking easier in real life, but for some schmo that used to do a lot of HEMA, aka historical European martial arts, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is what I like to say is probably the most expensive game that I can play in the year of our Lord 2025. Not for the actual price of the game, its DLC, and so on, but for the fact that no other game has given me the craving to go back to HEMA quite like this. It is also one of the few games on this list that gets on here and so high up without me even having to complete it, because for the 20 or so hours that I have put into it, I know it's going to be a great experience, and I would highly and easily recommend it to anyone that wants a lovingly recreated taste of the Middle Ages, or perhaps even those Bethesda enjoyers that are dying of thirst waiting for Elder Scrolls 6. It don't got any magic in it, but you can take a bath in it, which is probably what you guys need the most. Stupid ass jokes aside, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 can be found on PC, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series consoles for the price of €60 or $80 Canadian, but I have already seen almost like half off on Steam sales, and at those prices, fellas, KCD 2 is a friggin' steal.
And there we have it, gang. That was Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, another wonderful, solid game, and the kind of game that will probably drain my bank account once I get into HEMA, which, soon, TM. Hopefully soon. Who knows? Maybe this year. Maybe. Who knows? But regardless, gang, that was number 5, and now we gotta head on to number 4.
Number 4.
So, Shroud dupes you into a trap where he destroys the Mecha Man suit and puts you in a coma for months.
I didn't hear a question in there.
Does this mean you're finished? Can you repair your Mecha Man?
Up next, is Mecha Man a mecha quitter?
Figured my story would always end in that suit.
Time for you to accept that you don't got it anymore. We need you behind that desk to help actual heroes. Now, get your flat ass off my bench.
Looks like the Red Ring was behind this.
No problemo.
Can I get ice down here?
Got it. I need you guys to focus.
Heard the team scuffling with the Red Ring.
We are bound to bother them at some point.
If you poke the hive, you're gonna have to fuck the queen.
That's not how bees work. But if we kill the queen, we rot the hive.
You would do that. Kill Shroud.
taking their collective experience working at Telltale, the folks over at Ad Hoc Studio, in collaboration with the fine storytellers at Critical Role, bring us Dispatch, a goofy-ass little adventure game experience centered around Robert Robertson, who is working as a dispatcher over at SDN, the Superhero Dispatch Network. Also known as Mecha Man, after a fateful day where his suit was irreparably damaged, Robert gets picked up, quite literally, by her thigh-licious gal pal Blonde Blazer, a sort of manager over at SDN, to hire Robert as a dispatcher, who is the person behind the screen that will strategically dispatch superheroes to calls that range from "Help, my cat is stuck in a tree" to "the goons are stealing the ancient gemerald," and then using the roster of superheroes at disposal and their selective powers and skills to fulfill the call properly. But as always with these experiences, there's a catch, and this time around the catch is that Robert is trying to rehabilitate the Z-Team, which is made up of people in what's called the Phoenix Program, a program where former villains go to become superheroes and gain a new lease on life. This is of course easier said than done, so it's up to Robert over the course of 8 episodes to dispatch the right not-so-super soups to the right calls, try not to get his shit kicked in by an entire team of relatively reluctant villains, and see if he can get the right gal at the end of the day.
Honestly, gang, we're probably at the point in the list where you all probably know what the next games are going to be, but regardless, at number 4, we got ourselves a nice little adventure game gem in Dispatch. And one of the interesting things that Dispatch does over the other adventure or visual novel games in this list is that it has the dispatch system. So let's talk about dispatching some baddies.
While the Telltale games of yore were more closely related to point-and-click adventure games, Ad Hoc has decided to go for a more linear but refined gameplay style that enhances the cinematic aspect of the game on one end and giving us the goofiness of the dispatch system on the other. For starters, we'll talk about the non-dispatch elements of the gameplay, since it's much simpler than what it used to be with these kinds of games, eschewing the point-and-click looking around and investigating gameplay for a more cinematic experience that basically looks like normal cutscenes, with the occasional choice that can range from "how the hell are you even going to react to an asthmatic tomboy telling you that she had a wet dream about you," or more time-sensitive decisions on how to pursue a villain that is running away. Usually I'm pretty conflicted on these sorts of choices. As a connoisseur of ye old point-and-click adventure games, a lot of the times having less choice in the interactivity in the environment is no bueno, but since Dispatch is a much more character-driven experience, I actually don't mind that they focus the gameplay where it really matters, which is the dispatch system. In a single day of being an SDN dispatcher, you'll have calls come in with a variety of super problems for your would-be Z-Team super losers to solve, and each of these calls have their own requirements. A cat stuck in a tree could require somebody that is swift or could fly up to go grab it, while a superhero with a resume of janitorial duties could be better equipped to stop a malfunctioning bidet spewing poopy water everywhere. That is, of course, not to say that there won't be robbery stopping or even quest chains that start from simple investigations that lead to a grand finale for the end of the day that are much more heavier in narrative. The dilemma in these cases are who you're going to send, since each hero in the Phoenix program has their own specialties, skills, and perks that help them during a dispatch, and when you send one, the game will have a sort of dice roll that will overlay the hero's skill pentagon over the dispatches, and where it overlaps is the area of success. If it stays in the overlapped area, the call is a success, and if not, the call fails. And if the call fails, then the prospective hero gets injured, which means that they'll have to sit out any calls in the meantime, and then after a little while they can work calls again, but with a debuff to their skills, making it much more difficult, with the worst case scenario being an injury where they have to sit out the entire shift and then return in the second shift. At that point, the crux of the gameplay is the management of your soups, making sure you send them to the right calls with the right heroes and trying to make it to the end of the ship without failing too many, and getting that wonderful management review when you reach the proper milestones. All the while, you're hearing the banter between all the Phoenix Program Z-listers that usually have to do with the overarching narrative beat going on in that episode. It might not seem that the gameplay has much going for it, but it has a great flow to it that makes each shift feel like something you want to go through. Not just to see what the gang has to say with what's going on in the episode, but to see what sort of weird-ass calls are going to be coming in.
and you're gonna want to listen to what everybody has to say, because man, oh man, the narrative that the guys over at Ad Hoc have done is so wonderful. It's equal parts like dramatic, it's equal parts funny, and for somebody who is kind of tired on cape shit, it is a nice, wonderful superhero story that made me invested in it. Like I've said before, gang, I've sort of been done with a lot of superhero stuff for a while now, after a good decade of non-stop Marvel, but that doesn't mean that when a great and novel story comes around that it won't make me raise an eyebrow. And with Dispatch, this is the sort of shot in the arm that I needed. Probably one of the aspects of the narrative that I enjoyed the most of Dispatch is that instead of being a really plot-heavy narrative, where they're doing the thing to grab the MacGuffin, to take it to the place, to do the thing, and then beat the bad guy, and so on, Dispatch kind of starts off with what would be the end of the narrative for a character, and then through that character drive the drama that lends a new leaf on life for Robert Robinson, aka Mega Man. And without spoiling it, the game centers around Robert and the other ex-villains, now would-be heroes of the Z-Team, his colleagues at STN, and so on, where they take what would usually be a relatively rudimentary office drama, but then putting the powder keg of all these characters having superpowers, and it makes for some really damn good drama by the end of it. Like, I genuinely, apart from one character for a very petty reason, mostly because he's voiced by Moist Critical and I cannot get that out of my damn head. But anyway, I really did enjoy and grow to love pretty much all the characters. They each all have their own charms and quirks and little character arcs that make them feel more like normal people with superpowers than the archetypes that we're so used to. Which leads me to say that Dispatch is absolutely an adult narrative with the sort of tone and outlook on superheroes, but unlike a lot of what I would call quote-unquote adult superhero stories, where the narrative and satire is just like really annoyingly mean-spirited with lots of horrendous sexual violence and gore and just a general greasy sleaziness that leaves me with a bad taste in my mouth. And this is coming from a guy who loves all this greasy, sleazy exploitation cinema, but Dispatch instead goes towards a more grounded and lighter outlook on things. The extent of the adult content in Dispatch is mostly a lot of cheeky jokes, cheeky butts and booba, but most of all just a lot of character drama that comes from adults being adults, that instead of being really silly and juvenile, it comes across really sincere and genuine, which is a very, very refreshing feeling to be had when it comes to this sort of source material. But you can tell that the narrative is a great one because arguably if you took all of the adult content out, you would still be left with an incredible cape shit superhero story that through its goofy but real characters brought a huge ass stupid smile on my face. And I was glad that I was able to experience it. Which leads me to why Dispatch worked so damn well, and it has to do with all the aspects of the presentation, the incredible art design, the incredible animation, the wonderful, wonderful soundtrack, and the exquisite performances that all the voice actors have done. While I have some reservations about Critical Role, none of which actually have to do with the group itself, but what I would call the irreparable damage that they have inadvertently done to tabletop RPGs, I will say that the fellas in that group are all incredibly talented at creating not just great narratives, but giving voice to them, in this case quite literally. Pretty much every character in the cast is so well performed, whether it be Robert Robertson, played by Aaron Paul of Breaking Bad fame, Invisigal, played by the ever-wonderful Laura Bailey, who to me, my favorite role of hers is still Kaine from Nier, and a large amount of guest stars that make up the rest of the cast and Z-Team, my favorite of which is Young Gravy as Golem, who I am convinced he needs to play a Krogan in the next Mass Effect. Especially with Aaron Paul, I was quite surprised to hear that this was his first video game role because he played Robert so well and made it look so effortless. But the whole cast deserves their flowers because when it comes to the little moments, whether it be going through banter on a shift, or the bigger moments when they're pouring out their hearts out during moments of heightened drama, or even other smaller moments like when they're asking you if you're gonna eat those Twinks, aka Twinkies, they do an exquisite job of bringing these characters to life. Some would even say that their voices give color to their characters, which is a great moment to say that the art style for Dispatch, which is this sort of timeless cel-shaded animation that feels ripped right out of a comic book, is the perfect aesthetic for a game about dispatching a bunch of superheroes. One of my favorite elements of the visuals actually has to do with the wonderful use of colors, where every single character has these great striking primary colors for their palette,
that doesn't differentiate them but leans in on that comic book aesthetic. And while a lot of you guys probably already know, for somebody like myself that is red-green colorblind, having a game with so many vibrant colors really helps out, since a lot of that stuff can feel unintentionally muted in colors, since I literally do not have the rods and cones to see them. But don't worry gang, even if you aren't colorblind, there will be a lot of rods and cones for you to see in Dispatch. Finally, the final element that should be mentioned is the wonderful soundtrack by Andrew Arcady that doesn't just mix a wonderful synthy bop with really crunchy retro tracks to work away a shift of dispatching to, but also an incredible slew of licensed tracks that perfectly fit the moments when they play, creating a whole new playlist of music that I gotta listen to after completing the game. Top tracks that I remember both vividly and fondly is probably Kissing Someone Else by Caroline Kingsbury, which plays at the beginning when you're at the bar drinking with Blonde Blazer in the first episode, that doesn't just transport me to that moment but makes me infinitely depressed that I am at this moment not hanging out with the homies, playing the shittiest round of pool they could possibly ever imagine with a beer on one hand and perhaps a cute gal on the other. It's the sort of song that makes me instinctually look in the fridge to go for another beer. That's how I would describe it. The other track I'll talk about briefly so as to not just ramble on endlessly about every single wonderful moment is a song called Radio by Bershi, which plays during a house party that is so friggin' perfect for the montage that plays beforehand and the actual party itself, with shots of people drinking a beer, dancing a little jig, and most important of all, which has to be hearing this song while also seeing the ever-gorgeous muscle-bound demon gal Malevola dance a little jig in Daisy Dukes, with that bright red skin contrasting on blue jeans, irreparably altering my brain chemistry to the point that radio just lives in my head rent-free, among other things.
Honestly, gang, it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know how the streamers can play this damn game without the licensed music, because it changes the mood of things so perfectly. I don't even know how could you take that out of the game? I just don't get it. But regardless, one thing that you can't take out of any of the experiences is just how damn well Dispatch is as a video game. And it's another great example of the quality of a great story told well.
Dispatch is one of those titles that for releasing near the end of the year, I always worry that when it reaches a spot so high on the list, that I'm really sort of feeling a sort of recency bias. But the fact of the matter is that as I look at what came before it and what comes after, it's honestly at the perfect spot. Another sentiment that was decidedly smashed by Dispatch and honestly by Superman this year is the idea that I could really ever get tired of experiencing a really goddamn good superhero story. Because just like with horror, just like with action, just like with comedy or a mixture of any genre in between, when it's done really well, what else is there to friggin' say, man? So hats off to the fellas over at Ad Hoc Studio for not just making an episodic adventure game where every sequential episode is better than the last without missing a goddamn friggin' beat, but also creating something that by the end of it I am begging on my hands and knees for a season 2, because I don't need it tomorrow, I needed it friggin' yesterday. But even then, for the fellas out there that haven't gone through Dispatch, and if you are looking to pick it up, and I absolutely recommend that you do, it can be found currently on PC and PS5 for around €30 or $40 Canadian, with a probable release on Nintendo Switch 2 and Xbox Series console in the future. But regardless, that is a great price for 8 full episodes of incredible storytelling.
Needless to say, gang, you bet your ass I'm going to be there for whatever Ad Hoc does next, whether that be some other project or a season 2 of Dispatch. I will eagerly await what they got to do. But with that, we got to move on, and now we are at the top 3, the cream of the crop. And each one of these could have been Game of the Year easy on their own right. But, of course, there can only be one of them. So let's head on over to number 3.
Number 3.
The airliner Lint has gone missing.
There will come a time when she has to choose her own path.
You gotta hurry and bring Dad back.
Estelle, look out!
It's not my style to just sit and wait.
Your There's no doubt that something is stirring.
There are forces in this world that your eyes cannot see.
Watch out!
Taking place 10 years after the Kingdom of Liberl fought the war against the Erebonian Empire, and 10 years since the fateful night that the black-haired and amber-eyed boy joined the Bright family. Trails in the Sky First Chapter is a remake of the, first chapter in Nihon Falcom's Trails series, which follows Estelle and Joshua Bright as they travel the Kingdom of Liberl in their quest to become senior bracers of the Bracer Guild, a non-governmental organization acting to keep the peace and protect civilians wherever its numerous and continent-spanning branches reach. While only the age of 16, Estelle, the red-haired, twin-tailed, feisty tomboy, and her adopted brother, the black-haired, mature, and calculating Joshua, are tasked by their father, Cassius Bright, to travel the land and help out all the other branches of the Bracer Guild across the Kingdom of Liberl in order to get the recommendations to become senior bracers. This journey is of course easier said than done, so Estelle and Joshua will be joined along the way by allies new and old so they can help the people of the kingdom, whether that be something intense like stopping an airliner hijacking or simply playing the roles of a princess and her stalwart knight in a school play. But somehow at the center of it all lies a layer of intrigue that might just consume the two siblings. Man, oh man, fellas, Trails in the Sky or Trails of Cold Steel or just the Trails series in general, it's one of those series that I have been hounded to play by some of my finest homies to play forever and ever and ever and ever. And now that the remake came out for Trails in the Sky First Chapter, I thought, you know what? There ain't no better place to jump in than right now. So I went and did it, and damn, it's going to be pretty damn good. That being said, before we get to the gameplay, I am going to give a disclaimer. I did not play the original Trails in the Sky, so with the changes of tone, narrative, writing, or the world or stuff like that, I don't really know, and I'm going to be real, I kind of don't care. But from what I've heard, this is a really damn faithful remake. So without further delay, let's talk about the gameplay. Gameplay-wise, Trails in the Sky First Chapter, which from now on is probably just going to be Trails in the Sky, is a relatively standard JRPG, i.e. Japanese role-playing game, with what is called the Action Plus Turn-Based Combat System, a system where in the overworld you'll be going around and attacking enemies in the area in real time, having a mixture of attacks, power attacks, and dodges until you have an opening, and then you get thrown into turn-based combat goodness. From here on, this is where the combat really gets interesting, unless you're one of those people. Which, if that's the case, just know that under the Dharma caste system, I actually think you might be under the Untouchables. Which, phew, that's pretty rough, buddy. Jokes aside, when you get to turn-based combat, the whole combat system opens up quite a bit, with a series of different mechanics that keep the combat feeling fluid and dynamic. Though there's like 3 different gauges other than health, so it comes across a lot more complicated than it is, so let me explain it a little bit. For starters, you can attack normally with your weapons, whether that be Estelle's staff, Joshua's twin short swords, or more exotic weapons like Sherazar's whip. Then you have your tactical orbments that can cast orbal arts, aka your magic system, and then on top of that you have your crafts, which is just your character skills, and each one of these has their own gauges in combat, but they all work in tandem with each other in order to beat the shit out of people and monsters in combat. The CP gauge is for your skills, and every time you attack an enemy or cast nuclear spells, it increases the gauge to a maximum of 200, and the more powerful skills you use, the more it drains the gauge, with S-crafts, which are your super duper special skills draining it the most, but also doing the most damage. Spells, on the other hand, use the EP gauge, which starts at the top and then slowly as you cast more and more spells, drains until you use an item to refill it, level up to top it off, or go to a rest area for the day. And then there's the additional element that spells usually need time to cast, so if an enemy moves out of the way or otherwise knocks them down, then they'll have to start casting from scratch. But there are conditions that can be met to cast a spell instantly. Final gauge is the BP gauge, which doesn't actually mean Boston Pizza gauge, you fat bastard. It actually means Brave Points gauge, which with every successful attack, skill, or spell cast increases, and when you target an enemy's weakness or perform a critical hit, it will give you the chance to do a follow-up attack, which ranges from something as simple as a normal attack followed up by Joshua or somebody else, to a Persona-esque all-out attack where the whole gang piles on. Frankly, the combat for Trails in the Sky isn't anything revolutionary, but it fulfills that JRPG itch of setting up the board and positioning your characters, start the casting of spells, and eventually laying down the pain with some skills to get the whole squad doing a little tactical ballet of whoop-ass. Though my biggest gripe with the combat is probably the action combat before it goes into turn-based, since it's pretty simple until maybe 2/3 of the way through the game when they add on another mechanic, but for the most part you're just whacking and dodging until an enemy is stunned enough, and that can get old pretty fast, but overall I really don't have major gripes with the combat.
If you are a seasoned JRPG veteran like myself here, the Action Plus system, it's not going to knock your socks off, but it has enough gauges and presentations and all these wonderful mechanics, whether it be the BP, CP, EP, or even the PP gauge once your bladder gets full, that it does things that'll keep you entertained while you play through the whole game. But one aspect of the experience that was pretty damn good is the presentation of the game, and for how small Nihon Falcom is as a studio, it's actually really impressive.
I think we should preface this section not only on the fact that Falcom is a pretty damn small studio of roughly 60 people, which compared to entities like Fatless, that has around 420 employees, or even greater entities like Square Enix with over 4,000 people in it, so it's pretty incredible that those 60 people created a game that looks and sounds as great as it does. To put things in a perspective, gang, the current gameplay is of the original Trails in the Sky first chapter that came out all the way back in 2004. And while this isn't bad at all, hell, I'm the sort of guy who's currently running through Grandia on the PS1 on my off days, so the old aesthetic doesn't bother me at all, but regardless, this is a considerable upgrade from where things used to be. But an aspect of the presentation with remakes that always comes into question is just how faithful is the narrative, tone, aesthetics, and sounds to the original, and while we will get into the narrative of Trails in the Sky later, I will say from the get-go that all aspects of this experience are incredibly faithful to the original, at least from a quick glance, localization and translation differences notwithstanding. With the visual element, the design, and the aesthetic of the Kingdom of Liberl has been kept largely intact, and you can see throughout the whole game how basically every single item, person, location, and vehicle has been lovingly recreated in the same engine but without changing the style or the design at all, which is something you almost never see with any of these remakes these days. Like, one of the minor visual details that I love that only shows up for like a split second at a time is that whenever you load into a new area, at the bottom of the screen they use the ancient models as a sort of chibi loading sprite, and it's so wonderfully charming that it puts a stupid smile on my face every time that I see it. Then we have the soundtrack that, from a quick glance, taking the tracks from the original and then comparing it with the remake of First Chapter, we can see that it is an incredibly faithful remaster of the tracks that are practically all the same, just remastered with a higher fidelity sound and a few more extra compositions to add a little something something. An element that I really like about the soundtrack as well is that it has this sort of timeless quality to it. Like, you can tell that the game was developed for a different time, but it still holds up in a way that makes it feel classic. Some particular tracks that I really enjoy are any of the tracks that have to do with the Sky Pirates that have this sort of like jazzy spin to it, especially one where you have to go after them and chase them called Pinch. But really, fellas, while maintaining these, what would seem like small details in the aesthetics of the world, or in literally just remastering the soundtrack might seem like small fry stuff, it really goes to show not just how faithful of a remake this iteration of Trails in the Sky is, but that Falcom genuinely believed that the world and the narrative could stand on its own 2 feet, without alterations.
And they would be friggin' right, gang, because without exaggeration, the best of the best stories out there are genuinely timeless. And the story of Estelle and Joshua going through their journey to become senior bracers, to me, it was an instant classic.
The aspects of the narrative of Trails in the Sky that really won me over are twofold, and they have to do with the aspects of the world building and storytelling, that at first most JRPGs tend to not really focus on, followed by choices they do in the character writing that solves a major issue that I have with many RPGs in general. To start off, I think we should talk about the world building of the Trails games and how in slowly but surely piecing together the world of Zemuria, they have achieved a type of world building that most JRPGs just frankly don't even care about sustaining. For instance, we start off the story being told of the continent of Zemuria and some of its major players, ranging from the Eastern Republic of Calvard, the Northern Erebonian Empire, and our little scrappy kingdom of Liberl, of which the latter two recently had a war with each other and tensions are high but slowly recovering. So if we were playing, say, one of the Tales of games, which are games that I absolutely adore, or even something like Final Fantasy, they would set up all these kingdoms, empires, and cultures and whatnot, and you would be sure in knowing that by the end of this game, we will have visited each and every single one of them, and each one would have been made up of one city that we get to see once and then never again. And since this is generally how most JRPGs do things for the most part, we don't really think too much of this setup to world building, it's just the way that things are. Trails, on the other hand, throws that idea out the friggin' window and instead puts its 2 feet on the ground to do some proper ass world building. And it does that by fleshing out each individual region and state to be not just its own thing, but also, as I have come to understand, their own game series, where Trails in the Sky being in Liberl while Trails of Cold Steel takes place in Erebonia. And as somebody that has played his fair share of JRPGs, it was frankly kind of shocking that they introduced all this lore, all these different places, and the war that happened, and then at the end of the day go, yeah, but for this game, you're only going to be in the Kingdom of Liberl. You won't be heading to Erebonia or Calvard at all, and I absolutely adored this approach. What this means in layman terms is that the Kingdom of Liberl has been turned into what would have previously been just one city and maybe a smaller town in between, into the capital city of Gransel and the other provincial cities of Roland, Bose, Rouen, and Zeiss that each have their own smaller towns, hamlets, academies, and other points of interest that make the Kingdom of Liberl seem like a really fleshed out place. By creating the world in this manner and giving it the narrative scale that it deserves, it doesn't just flesh out the greater setting, but makes the story of Estelle and Joshua going city to city to solve the issues of those regions, and in their pursuit to become senior bracers, come to appreciate the people that they will grow to protect. Through the entire journey, you'll be dealing with the mayors of these cities, learn about their cultures, what makes them so different, the problems and the lay of the land around them, that by the end of the chapter, when it was time to move on to the next region after resolving the issues central to that region, it was quite bittersweet since you became quite attached to that region and its characters. And while we'll get to how this approach to exploring the world enhances the characters of Trails in the Sky soon, I want to highlight some of my favorite moments in the game, and it comes from when you usually, for the main quest, have to go to one of the smaller villages or hamlets in the region, because every time that you do, it kind of plays this really peaceful track that just plucks away at the harp, and in those moments I usually became really reflective. These moments are the times that Estelle and Joshua usually stop to take a break, go grab something to eat that's local to the region, and just take in the moment. That to me were really impactful moments that I constantly go back and think about. Fellas, if you've ever been on a road trip and somewhere, there's always like these places that you eventually stop along the way for your necessities, that in the grand scheme of your trip, they were just a stop, but sometimes they kind of really stick with you. It could be a small town to grab some gas or pull over to go take a leak and restock on snacks, or just the point where you get hungry and see that roadside barbecue stand and give it a try. And while you're in those towns, breathing that air, fueling that gas, or eating that food, there's that emotion that hits you. That is like you realize you're in this town that you might have never been to before, and frankly, you might never see that town again in your life. You might never deal with that waitress or smell the smell of fuel in the air while looking around. So you get reflective and you realize that you're there, and in that moment is special and that can never be taken away from you.
Trails in the Sky is one of those games that it didn't just bring out that feeling in me just to begin with, it brought out that feeling in me over and over and over again. And it's one of those things where I'm just so thankful that a game could do that it could bring such a powerful emotion from something as simple as just like being in a town that you've never been before. And it was powerful, but it's that attention to detail and the setting that allows the characters of Trails in the Sky to flourish. And even though they're a little bit tropey, the characters in Trails in the Sky are just wonderful. I genuinely love every single one of them, and they solve the age-old, what I like to call the companion dilemma. Fellas, you ever play a wonderful RPG that's got a great story with great characters and companions that really give life to the whole experience? Many times it can be an RPG where you have a ragtag group of ex-convicts, marauders, the classic thief, some wise guy sweet talker, a gearhead techie, and so on. And while you play the game and are introduced to these characters, followed by talking to them at the hangout between missions, everything is fine and dandy, but eventually a new mission will arise and the question will come up of, damn, so how am I gonna bring this time? Sure, the mission might be specific for a character, so you bring them along plus someone else, but for every other time, if you're someone like me, you just tend to bring your favorites pretty much every damn time. So you're living in a world of, yeah, I'm just gonna bring Tali and Garrus in Mass Effect, or Morrigan and Alistair in Dragon Age, and so on. Sure, the game might throw a wrench your way that requires a certain companion, or frequently in JRPGs, a boss comes up that needs that certain companion who is strong against them. But for the most part, when it's a regular mission, I have a really horrible habit of just bringing my favorites and ignoring the rest of the admittedly pretty decent cast, and this is what I like to call the RPG companion dilemma. Trails, on the other hand, so effortlessly solves this issue by each companion that you come across having their own general arc tied to the region that you're currently visiting. And that way, you visit a new region, come to know and enjoy its inhabitants, make a new friend along the way that has a great arc, and when it comes to move on to the next region, you have to say goodbye to them as well. And for me, this worked wonders in making me really care for the characters. Practically every single companion in Trails in the Sky, from the Silver Streak Sherazard to the Falcon Tide Chloe, the 4-foot 50 cal gunner Tita, or the mysterious grumpy Unk swordsman Agate, I enjoyed thoroughly, without issue, without groaning or complaining or otherwise thinking, damn, I wish I had this other person instead, because you spend so much time with these characters that they feel so well developed. But gang, I do gotta say that if you are worried that they'll show up once and then never again, well, I'll just say you got some surprises in store. It also helps that despite the flaws that each character might have, they not just act intelligently, but are also useful when they need to be. And that doesn't just extend to the companions, but also many of the characters that Estelle and Joshua will meet along the way. So much so that there's this ditzy photographer girl named Dorothy that is usually like a huge klutz, but she has her own moments, and it made me go like, holy shit, Dorothy actually did something useful for once? Damn, that's crazy. But at the end of the day, the story of Trails in the Sky isn't just about the companions you meet along the way, but the story of a young man with a past to hide and a young woman he calls his sister that walks beside him the whole journey. And it's the development of the relationship between Estelle and Joshua Bright that makes the whole ordeal worth going through. It's kind of a tropey, classic duo, but Estelle and Joshua really do complement each other as a team so damn well that you want to see where the story goes with them. You want to see how Estelle will grow into a fine young woman in her father's footsteps. You want to see how Joshua will finally get comfortable to the point that he can reveal the shameful past that he's been hiding since they met each other that fateful night years ago. And you want to see how the journey to grow into who they are supposed to be as bracers will have them intertwined with the central mystery concerning all of the events happening in Lurburl. And if you are an enjoyer of classic JRPGs, then I think this journey is one that you guys are going to get a real kick out of, with all the stupid jokes, palace intrigues, sky pirates, school plays, and a not so insignificant amount of some good old brother-sister bonding along the way. You know, fellas, I mentioned earlier that I have been hounded by some fine homies to play this game over and over and over and over again. And in the end, I am genuinely so glad that in the year of our Lord 2025, I finally went out to experience Trails in the Sky first chapter. Fellas, if you're looking for a wonderful JRPG with a great cast that has you on a trek throughout the country to learn about the world, meet goofy ass characters, and get out of some frankly absurd scenarios, and figure out just who we really are on the inside, then I can, with extreme confidence, recommend for you all to enjoy Trails in the Sky first chapter. After having played this gem from Nihon Falcom and seeing the foundations that they laid down in first chapter to eventually be this giant sweeping series taking place all over the Zemurian continent with a plethora of characters that will all assumably meet in a crossover arc later on that might as well be the JRPG version of the MCU, and you got me feeling like that one dumbass scene with Danny DeVito where he finally gets it. That is, of course, not to say that first chapter doesn't have its flaws. There's times where like the presentation gets really weird where you'll be in a conversation and like some people are voiced and some people aren't. That screams amateur hour. And for a game with as many German names as it has, they sure do annoy me with the mispronunciations that they do all the damn time. You know, like the sort of stuff like Schwartz versus Schwetz and so on, or Weiss versus Weiss. But hey, it's not like I have a skin in that game anyways. And oh boy, my biggest gripe of all, that isn't necessarily because of a flaw, but I'm just gonna say, fellas, without spoiling anything, the end of first chapter has such a huge friggin' nasty cliffhanger, and I was shocked that Falcom had the gall to do something like that to me, and I will take it personally, but apparently the original had the same ending, which is kinda crazy. Regardless, gang, Trails in the Sky first chapter is straight up an instant classic. With the sequel coming out this year, I can't wait to get my hands onto that and dive headfirst into the incredible world that Falcom has created, and the many different stories across the Zemurian continent. So with that, Trails in the Sky first chapter can be found on PC, Switch, and PS5 at €60 or $80 Canadian, which sadly is the price for some of these games these days, but I can assure you, gang, that the journey is worth every damn penny. Ooh-wee. Well, there goes number 3, and man oh man, I bet you guys can't believe it, but we still got 2 more games in this already exhaustive list, so let's just head on to number 2.
You were all transferred to this academy for a very special reason. The complete and utter extermination of any and all enemy troops who dares to threaten our beloved school's peace. During your time here, you happy few, will be molded into the perfect Special Defense Unit.
What even are those monsters, anyhow?
As such, I've decided to designate them School Invaders. Oh, they are a violent and pernicious race, the enemy of all mankind.
Takumi Sumino is your everyday schmo living his everyday life under the safety of the Dome Tokyo residential complex, spending his days in mundane tranquility with his high school gal pal Karuha. That is, of course, till one day the Dome is under attack by an unknown beings, and it spurs Takumi into action. Finding Karuha lying on the road with monsters ready to kill her off, an unassuming egg by the name of Sirei hands him a suspicious knife that Takumi is supposed to stab himself to transform into a potent fighter and save Karuha. Once the choice is made, the knife is plunged, and Karuha saved, the world becomes unraveled, and Takumi gets sucked into the ether, only to wake up in a strange classroom surrounded by similarly estranged people from the Tokyo residential complex. Cue Sirei to show up and explain what's going on, which can be summed up that they are at the Last Defense Academy, humanity's last hope to fight against a vile and barbaric enemy that will continually send troops to try and destroy the academy. So to save humanity from extinction, Takumi and his newly found friends will have to hold off against the onslaught for 100 days till graduation day. You fellas, if you knew me, you knew that this game, my white whale that I had chased for over 4 months and over 200 hours, would make it onto this list. And what a perfect fit it has over at number 2. And if you know this is number 2, you probably know what's going to be number 1, but regardless, we'll get to that soon. But one disclaimer that I do want to say is that with games that I've actually done a video on before, I'm going to be a little bit brief because I don't really want to, 1, talk over myself again, and 2, if you really want to know what I fully have to say in much greater detail, what I have to say about the 100-line Last Defense Academy, I'm just going to point you to that damn video. Yeah, it's a little bit chilly, but hey, who cares? So, let's talk about the gameplay. Finally landing on Last Defense Academy, we have not just the final visual novel of our list, but the finest one all friggin' year thanks to the efforts of director Katsutake Kodaka, known for the Danganronpa games, and the other fine fiends over at Tokyo Games, including the The Somnium Files creator Kotaro Uchikoshi. But this time around, Last Defense Academy has a trick up its sleeve. The main difference with Last Defense Academy is that instead of being solely a visual novel, it adds in the defense battles where the gang have to go out and defend the academy by transforming into their class armor like in the beginning, and from there the game will turn into a turn-based tactics RPG, where every one of the guys at Last Defense Academy has their own quirks and skills to make it to the end of the day. Frankly, as I mentioned in my review, the battles, while at first pretty novel, can get pretty damn tiresome as the game goes on. And with the amount of choices at your disposal after the prologue, there's a whole lot of game to go around, with the game boasting that it has 100 endings. What this basically means is that the game doesn't just have 100 endings, but numerous really well developed routes that can turn the experience from something akin to after-school comedy hour, to a rom-com, to one of my favorites being a route where there's a serial killer on the loose in the academy. And these sorts of stories make the variety of different routes available something really worth exploring. But for the gang out there that might not be aware, the vast majority of the gameplay for Last Defense Academy is in that visual novel format, so you're going to be doing a whole lot of reading and reacting to what is going on as you slowly but surely unravel the mystery of just what in the hell is going on in this ruined world. I know, comparatively speaking, we're sort of blasting through this, but when it comes to the gameplay, there's really not much to talk about apart from the fact that the bulk of it is a visual novel. So with that, let's talk about how the game presents itself. The wonderful part about talking about the presentation of a Katsutake Kodaka game is that I get to Brazilian wax poetic on some of my favorite artists over at Tokyo Games, and those are of course Kodaka longtime collaborators Rui Komatsuzaki, who has done the character designs and art for most of his games, and Masafumi Takeda, who has composed the Danganronpa games, the original The Somnium Files, and even has a hand in some weirder stuff, like The Evil Within, which I just did a retrospective on, by the way, so give that a watch. To start off, we'll talk about Komatsuzaki having done the art design for games like Danganronpa, Rain Code, and now Last Defense Academy, and he has a very specific style that I really tend to enjoy in the characters that he creates. What I specifically love in how he tends to design his characters is that every single character has like wildly different styles and silhouettes that are great ways to give character to these, well, characters. For instance, there's people like Takumi or Aito that are closer to player XPs in character, so they wear relatively normal clothes, like hoodies and jeans, which contrasts nicely with some of the more out there characters, like the disgustingly seen emo gal Darumi, who doesn't shut the hell up when it comes to depressing eroge or killing games, or the 10-ton power wrestling terror Moko, who cares about her skincare routine just as much as she does suplexing your ass through a friggin' table. Another aspect that I've come to really appreciate lately after replaying the first Danganronpa with the fellas is that I really love how Komatsuzaki draws his eyes for his characters, well, with most of them having these really deep colors and almost like they have multiple layers of irises. For instance, Takumi has deep 13th Legion ultramarine blue eyes, or Nozomi having just absolutely gorgeous violet eyes. And since I already mentioned it, but being colorblind, it is really nice when those colors pop, since
a lot of the things can seem rather muted, but in the case of Last Defense Academy, the colors come out in full force. Moving on then to the work of the other maestro in a frankly never-ending series of maestros for the Last Defense Academy. But anyway, we should talk about Masafumi Takeda, who, just like his other work spanning many a Kodaka experience, brought his own brand of composing to the Last Defense Academy mix. The soundtrack in particular I have to really tip my hat to, because it is not an easy task to create a soundtrack for a game that there will likely be freaks like me that spend well over 200 hours playing and listening to it that makes it feel like second nature, like a good friend or co-worker that you see all the damn time. So when you hear it over and over and over and over again, and I must stress over and over and over again, you just never really get tired of it. But in general, the soundtrack is going to weld the gap between the two sides of Last Defense Academy emotionally, which is taking the day-to-day mundaneness of it all, of dealing with friends and the sort of issues that high school kids get up to in their spare time, and then contrasting that with the heightened tensions of having the weight of all humanity on their shoulders, that eventually thrust them into open conflict with the violent, barbaric enemies of the school invaders. To highlight a few tracks that I love, one has to be Talk Talk, which is a track that plays when you're conversing with people in the academy, usually after something that has happened, and Takumi comes back and the rest of the gang are all glad to see that he's still alive. And well, I could even consider it a sort of theme for Nozomi, since that's the track that I most associate with her, and I always remember that track playing whenever she's talking, especially when she's doing that one sprite that she's kind of like bending down and looking at you. There's another track as well called Open Sesame that tends to play when more about the mystery is being revealed, and the gang is sort of spurred into action, and this one is great because it has this tone of a conspiracy being revealed, but with the determination of knowing what can and has to be done to move forward. Honestly, gang, I could be talking about the soundtrack for ages, and there's so many tracks to talk about. Like, we didn't even talk about how I had a gent jump scare by a surprise villain at the end of the prologue, or how Takeda-san continually uses Claire de Lune by Debussy in his games, and that we still don't know the mystery of that, but we will find out one day. But, of course, if you want to know more, you know where to go. But all of these things, especially the presentation, the looks, the soundtrack, and that, it is in service of one thing, and that is to tell a story. And that is where the claws of the 100-line Last Defense Academy clawed into me. That's what kept me for so long. Seriously, you guys have no genuine clue how much Last Defense Academy had me in a friggin' death grip for almost 4 months straight. Not just for the scale of the narrative, but also the genuine quality that could be found in all of these routes and stories. The name of the game for the narrative for Last Defense Academy comes into two different flavors, and that is the changes that come in the narrative due to the choices that can be made, and what does that mean for the tone of the story and the overall writing of the characters. While not spoiling anything, there's an event that happens at the end of the prologue for Last Defense Academy that ends up allowing Takumi to be the master of his own destiny, and allowing him to start making drastic decisions going forward. So for example, you could be defeating a force of school invaders with the enemy still standing. Perhaps Takumi will make the choice to keep them alive in a cell, or just consume their essence to improve his stats. Receiving a notification that there's a large enemy force heading towards the academy while another location is also under attack, which one are you going to go and reinforce? Potentially leaving the chance that one of your allies and the other team might meet their demise. Basically, throughout the whole game, you'll be met with choices like the ones mentioned that might seem like a minor choice to be made in that moment. But the second that destiny has been set, you find yourself on a different fork of the route that you're currently on, or basically creating a whole different route entirely. Now, not all the routes are written by the same writers, so your mileage may vary in quality, but in general the quality of the routes are pretty damn good. Which, considering the variety of tones at disposal, ranging from getting bonked in the head and trying to find true love, to one of my favorites being a race against time to figure out who the serial killer is that is moitering around the academy. But either way, gang, all of this stuff comes together to create an experience that honestly is unlike anything else out there.
And that is just one aspect of it, because all these different routes, all these different things, it is in service for the characters, and how basically because of all these routes and all these choices that you can make, it turns all the characters in sort of a sandbox of all the different things that you can do with them, what can be done to them, like all the different feelings and aesthetics and cool things that are to happen in that game with these characters. And so let's talk about that part of the narrative. Having 100 different endings and about 20 different full routes that go through 100 days at Last Defense Academy is good and all, but the reason why we go through the torment of over 200 hours of visual novel goodness is due to the characters that you meet along in this journey. Fellas, if you're a fan of Danganronpa titles also directed by Kodaka, you might know what kind of stories you're going to get yourself into, but one element that typically is taken from you in those titles is that the characters slowly but surely whittle down from the original 16 students, and that comes with the main issue of a lot of those characters not getting the development that they should. That is of course a problem with the format of the Killing Game, but it is what it is. Last Defense Academy inversely basically hands you the ocean when it comes to these characters, and through seeing them in different scenarios through the 100 endings, you'll come to know and appreciate the characters on a level that none of the Danganronpa games really could get into. And a lot of the really great character writing in Last Defense Academy comes from this sort of deep investment into the game that you otherwise wouldn't really see. And that is of course not to say that if you don't want to invest all the way through that you won't get a good story, since I always say that you could always get a great visual novel experience playing through even just the prologue and reaching one of the main endings. But for the cream of the crop with these sort of characters comes from knowing them through a normal run and then seeing them from completely different perspectives in another route. One example that I always love to use is that there's a character who is a sort of natural partner for Takumi, and that she's pretty damn normal compared to the rest of the cast, and most of all, really deeply caring for her friends. And it's one of those things where you wonder to yourself if there's ever a route where they ever tell each other how much they actually feel. And like your Moby Dick, you go searching for that white whale to see if it's out there. Then, due to the actions that you might have done in another route, the relation that develops between these two takes a nosedive, and the characters through the rest of that route are at odds with each other, or incredibly distrustful, and that changes the dynamic between these two characters in a manner that was honestly really shocking. But honestly gang, this is one example of many that you will see throughout the journey of the students at Last Defense Academy in their mission to defeat the vile and barbaric enemy. There are so many other routes and endings that I could genuinely go on forever waxing poetic about them, but for now, if you want more information, well, you know where to look. Ultimately, gang, the 100-line Last Defense Academy is one of those games that I honestly can't really recommend to everybody, but for the people that I would recommend it to, if for the people out there that have the courage to dip their toes into this, man oh man, you're gonna find yourself an ocean of things to enjoy. I've said this so many times, fellas, but I always just point out to how many damn hours it took me to finish this freaking game. And I say this with the most honesty that I am not one of those people that's just gonna constantly keep playing until you reach the ending. If there's a game that I don't like, I honestly just drop it since I know that I'm not enjoying myself. Last Defense Academy, on the other hand, really and wholly gripped me for those 4 months, and the whole journey was something just honestly spectacular. I always say that with a lot of great JRPGs or many games that are very character driven, that when you finish the game that you're gonna get that post JRPG depression, which means to say that you spend so much friggin' time with these characters that when it comes to saying goodbye, you just get really teary-eyed and melancholic. And hoo-wee, fellas, saying goodbye to Takumi and the rest of the gang over at Last Defense Academy was a pretty rough and bittersweet one, and how could it not be after 200 hours and 4 months? But at the end of the day, that just goes to show how much I friggin' love this game, and while I don't think I'll be doing a replay anytime soon, I'll always be looking forward to whatever Katsutake Kodaka and the fine fiends over at Tokyo Games do next.
If you are the sort of person that enjoys visual novels, then the 100-line Last Defense Academy is an easy recommendation, as not just the single best visual novel / adventure game of 2025, but my second favorite experience of the year that I will remember and cherish for eons to come. If you're looking to get into the madness that is Last Defense Academy, then at the moment you can only pick up the game on PC and Nintendo Switch, with there being no Xbox Series consoles or PS5 ports on the horizon, strangely enough. But either way, you can grab the 100-line Last Defense Academy for €60 or $80 Canadian, which for the width and the depth of the experience is so wholly worth it, it's not even friggin' funny. Though, if that wasn't enough to convince you, my review for Last Defense Academy is down in the description, and if you are looking to get a little taste of what is to come, then there is a demo that you can download that goes quite a ways into the prologue, and then you can carry on your progress to the main game whenever you please. And like I said, gang, that was our second best game of 2025, and what a doozy it was to play that friggin' game. But that was number 2. On to the next game, which is our number 1 game, the game of the year. Let's go.
Number 1.
Do you know what it means to disappear into nothingness? Their memories, their dreams, their love for each other. We exist for as long as she wants. You won't yet understand. But this is a kindness, not a cruelty.
The plan doesn't change. We keep heading north. We aim for the monolith.
I am not letting Mael die out here.
I've been having nightmares.
Why do you refuse to see I am doing this for us?
Felt familiar somehow.
Fellas, you all knew what it was gonna be, and let's be friggin' real here, and of course at our number 1 spot is the runaway success of Clair Obscur Expedition 33, developed by the fine French over at Sandfall Interactive. Expedition 33 sets us in the world of Lumiere, a dying civilization that every day has to take a visage of the numbered monolith on the other side of the sea, and beneath it the paintress, who once a year wakes up to paint a new number, and when that number is painted, all those over that age will fade into oblivion in the gommage. Which brings us to our protagonist Gustave, that on the fateful day of the gommage, he spends it with his former significant other of Sophie, who when the paintress wakes will pass away with the rest of the people her age. After that fateful evening, Gustave, as well as her adoptive sister Mael and the other men and women of his age, set off on the latest expedition towards the continent to use the tools and knowledge provided to them by prior expeditions to find a way to kill the paintress so that she may never paint death again.
Man, I can't believe we're actually just finally here, and after a full year, Clair Obscur Expedition 33 has been the game that has been living in my head rent-free. Legitimately rent-free. Like, you guys have no friggin' clue how many times I've been listening to the soundtrack, how I've been looking at the concert, all this other sort of stuff. And it's one of those things where whenever I write my reviews on games, I always kind of wonder to myself if, like, when I write them, like, if I'm being too hyperbolic, like I'm being too ridiculous, whether I'm being wrong or it's like recency bias. And the fact that this game has been in my head rent-free since I did that video goes to show that I am not being hyperbolic, and it really is deserving of all its flowers. And I'm going to double down. Claire Obscure, Expedition 33 is the best RPG I've played since Nier Automata in 2017. I'm going to friggin' hold it to that. But this is another one of those where I've already done a video on it, so I'm going to be brief while not trying to be brief. But if you want way more details on what I feel about the game, head on over and go watch that video, because that's going to have all the details that you'll want. Quick disclaimer, fellas, but I will not be showing any footage after the first act, since there's some pretty heavy, narrative stuff that happens, and I wouldn't want to spoil it for those still looking to indulge. So if you're worried about spoilers, you're not going to get anything for it here, apart from, what's in the trailers. But anyway, Expedition 33, like Trails in the Sky and Demonschool before on this list, is another example of what's called a turn-based RPG, where when the gang gets into combat, you take turns with the enemies and the other members of your party, consisting of Mael, Luna, Ciel, and others that you will get along the way to deal damage, buff up your party, heal, and so on. What Expedition 33 does differently from their compatriots is a twofold solution to make turn-based combat feel more dynamic, and that has to do with how you go about traversing the overworld, and then how the combat itself has a lot of active elements in it. Starting with the overworld stuff, from a quick glance it looks like a lot of your typical JRPGs, so think stuff like Dragon Quest, where the gang will traverse a miniaturized version of the world until they come across an area that they load into. From there on, you'll traverse the environment fighting enemies, looking for treasure in places, and eventually you'll come across one of the resting zones that were set up by one of the prior expeditions, where you can use it to rest, level up your attributes, and restock on healing items. But inversely, every time that you do this, the enemies in the area will respawn, so you know that even though you just healed up, you'll have to go through these enemies again. What this means from a gameplay perspective is that to progress and level up, you have to counteract that with the fact that enemies will be respawning, and then comes in a risk-reward aspect that is similar to a lot of the Souls-like games where you have the same sort of bonfire mechanics. Unlike the Souls-like games, E33 is not so heavily focused on the difficulty of the journey, so it doesn't feel quite like there's that much of a risk to leveling, especially since you don't really lose the lumines or whatever they were called that you acquired. It just kind of seems in the end like a neat system that they wanted to implement. The other, and frankly more important aspect of the gameplay where Expedition 33 spices things up has to be in the much more active elements of the combat, where with every single enemy you can dodge, block, parry, and so on, but these come up as mechanics that you actively have to do instead of a dice roll that comes from most RPGs. There are also some ranged attacks that you can use to target weak spots in an enemy's defense, bringing about a critical hit or finding ways to do the most damage with every character's own specific mechanics, such as putting Mael into different stances, overcharging Gustav's mechanical arm, or using Ciel's light and dark card system to make the most of her skills. In the end, what all these aspects end up doing is creating a combat system that, while each individual element might have taken from something else that is already established, like an already established game, when you mix the whole thing together in a big ass blender, you create a gameplay system that feels so refreshing and new that it honestly becomes the kind of turn-based system that I can point to for those that might not be very inclined towards that system to begin with, and I would actually really recommend it as your first turn-based combat game because of all those active elements in it. One of the aspects I really like about the combat of Expedition 33 is that it makes you feel like with every encounter you're getting better at it. You're understanding the enemy characters, you know, like their attack patterns and stuff like that. So it's less feeling about, oh, a number went up and I'm better at the gameplay. Now it's I know how to dodge these people, I know how to perfect parry them and do all these things to make you feel like you're overcoming this expedition. But as per usual, we got to talk about the next thing down the line, and that is the presentation of Claire Obscure. And man, oh man, it has such a wonderful art style and soundtrack. And so with that, we got to talk about it. I say that it should finally destroy the Unreal 5 argument because we shouldn't be saying such ridiculous nonsense when we have such a beautiful world lovingly created using the guiding principles that can be found in the name itself, Claire Obscure. Claire Obscure is actually the French way to say an Italian art term known as chiaroscuro, a word meaning light-dark to describe the use of strong contrast between light and dark colors in painting, and we can see this everywhere in Expedition 33, from the visuals and sounds of the world to even the narrative itself, focusing and contrasting between light and dark themes. We have the visuals where you can see reefs or spectacular coral floating in the air, bringing a shining light of beauty into this painted world, while the bodies of slain expeditioners lie on the ground everywhere, followed by darker tones like the Vanta black darkness of danger lurking in the shadows, tragedy to befall the expedition, and melancholy of not just a world long lost, but one that with every year dies all that little bit more. Of the art design, I especially love the enemy designs that have a little from each of the areas that you come across. So you'll see people in an overland reef holding sea mines by a chain as if they were a balloon, or creatures that are made up of hexagonal basalt columns of the seaside cliffs, even using these columns as giant maces and clubs. Then furthermore, these ideas of the contrast between the light of hope for a better world and the darkness of living in a world that is already on its way out is probably most properly shown off with the incredible soundtrack composed by Lorien Testade, and many of the vocals sung by Alice Duport-Pellissier and Victor Borba, of which this soundtrack has been living in my head friggin' rent-free and been a continual thing that I've been listening to all year long. One of the things that I mentioned in my review that is a large reason that I enjoy the soundtrack is not just for its width and variance in tones, but that the soundtrack is very much like the masterpieces by a maestro such as Keiichi Okabe of Nier and Drakengard fame, and it is so wonderfully layered, like the finest cake to be found at Lyon Boulangerie. What I mean by layered is that in each area there are a plethora of different tracks depending on where you are in the map, what act you're in, what type of enemies you're fighting, and then taking and remixing those aspects into different parts of the soundscape. For instance, each and every character has a theme that many times is remixed in different ways, such as usually having a music box version of the track. So whether it be listening to something like Gustav's theme that has this beautiful arrangement of strings performing this melancholic tune that just so perfectly encapsulates the genuine sadness at the center of Gustav's character. It perfectly fits the theme of a man that has lost so much, but somehow in some way has to continue on to fight for a better world. And then one final track that I would love to talk about, and honestly gang, if I was gonna sit here and talk about the soundtrack, I would be here all friggin' day. But anyway, one that I think is musically such an incredible metaphor for the entire experience is one called, and I'm sorry for my Frenchy friends out there, Une vie d'amère, which roughly when translated means a life spent loving you. And I say that this is a metaphor for the whole experience because in this one 11-minute epic, we get so many different examples of the light of hope fighting against the tones of darkness and entropy, that then that struggle gets reinvented numerous times throughout the song where you don't even know where it's gonna go next. I almost always compare this track to something like Bohemian Rhapsody or any of my favorite Between the Buried and Me songs, where numerous times throughout the track it is radically changing and reinventing itself. And narratively, without spoiling anything, this is a frequent theme that shows up in Expedition 33. When you think that one door violently closes, the impact of that finale gently opens another one that keeps us going in this incredible journey.
Honestly, gang, I could go on and on about the soundtrack for Expedition 33. So much so that I tried to get tickets to the concert series that they're doing over here in Milan, and I didn't even have a chance. No way I had a chance. The tickets for that show sold out in 10 minutes, and not just for that show. In 10 minutes, it sold out everywhere. Like, I literally didn't have a snowball's chance in hell to get those tickets, but hey, whatever. At the very least, there's a buddy of mine out there that was able to secure tickets. So, to you, buddy, cheers. I hope you enjoy yourself. I know you're gonna enjoy yourself, but to people like me, I guess I'm gonna drink and
grab a shotgun and blow my friggin' head smooth off, because I don't know what else to do except suffer. But you want to talk about suffering, we should probably talk about the narrative of Expedition 33. Ooh-wee. Where do I even start with the narrative of Expedition 33? I guess I should start in saying that I love the premise of the setting and that Lumiere is this sort of post-apocalyptic world where the defining element of everyone's lives is that they know exactly when they will likely die by the Paintress's hands. It's such an interestingly depressing idea that anyone born into this world is already marked for death, and that the youngest people actually have the least amount of time in Lumiere, but at the heart of the journey is the dilemma of what does one do when met with such a fate? Do you resign yourself to death and live on in bliss for as long as you can, or do you pick up a sword and fight for a better tomorrow? Take for instance our protag in Gustave, who just before setting off on the expedition has his ex-paramour pass away in the Gommage. And the regret of all the times lost and the things not said is what drives him to join what is most assuredly a one-way trip to the Paintress. Like, I can imagine a world where Gustave might have been written to be an already married man to Sophie and they had a wonderful life together until that nasty, dastardly Paintress gommages all over the screen only for Sophie to die. But it's the above sentiment of regret that makes his character so tragic, because we don't cry for time spent well, we cry because of the doubt that we didn't spend it right at all. But Gustave is just one character of many within the expedition, and throughout the journey we'll get to know Luna, Ciel, and especially Gustave's adoptive sister Maëlle really well by the time that the credits roll. Hell, Maëlle, without spoiling anything, is an especially interesting character in Expedition 33. She's only 16, so she has at least 9 years of life ahead of her. But instead of choosing to stay behind in Lumiere, she decides to essentially forfeit it by joining the expedition with her one brother that she has to either succeed or die beside him. And how she loves her Gustaves and feels the need to be right beside him throughout this whole affair is going to really define Maëlle as a character, to the point that we get to the end of the game, we'll be shaking our head with tears in our eyes because the whole narrative is just so genuinely beautiful. Honestly, gang, I'm gonna be real. I am so genuinely blessed and lucky that I have never had to experience anything like Gustave had to deal with in the prologue of this game, because it's just friggin' tragic. But that being said, damn, this was one of the most effective 30-minute like prologues in a game I've ever played, because after that prologue, like, you bet your ass I was hooked and I was ready to see this game to the end. A way that I have described the narrative for Expedition 33 is that right at the moment when you see Sophie Gommage, the devs stab you with a knife right into your friggin' heart and twisted it, making it hurt a whole hell of a lot, and it fills you with heartache. Though after a while, that hurt goes away. You begin to see the beauty of the continent, and in many twisted ways, you get to see the beauty of the creatures that the Paintress has created, which, while there to basically kill your ass, are still beings in one way or another, just one that base humans can't understand. But the second that the heartache goes away, the instant that you let your guard down and forget about that knife still jutting out of your beating chest, the devs come in and twist that knife in some awful tragic event that happens throughout the narrative, and believe me, fellas, that it will continue to be that way up until you hit the credits. And even when the credits roll, depending on how you feel about the characters and the narrative, that knife will still be there, as it is with me all these months later, to remind you of the pain of such a tragic narrative. And I might be a sicko in saying this, but because of it, Expedition 33 is genuinely my favorite narrative experience lately since Signalis. It's really easy for a narrative to be this tragic and screw it up. But the fine folks over at Sandfall Interactive understand that for there to be tragedy in your narrative, You need a reason for it to be tragic, and Expedition 33 does this by showing you the beauty of the world, of all the creatures that inhabit it, the hopes, fears, dreams, and struggles of every member in the expedition that grounds the experience, and without that levity, without that humanity, the tragedy just doesn't work. And while I will admit that Expedition 33's narrative really resonated with me, it might genuinely be too much for some of you guys out there. Without exaggeration, the narrative is so bittersweet in both senses of the word, and some of the twists and turns that happen in the narrative might be too much with how tragic and cruel it can be to characters that we have fallen in love with. But like I said, fellas, I'm a huge sicko that loves these sort of tragic stories, and Expedition 33 is the right dosage of bittersweet storytelling that I have been craving for a long time. And thankfully, the gang over at Sandfall Interactive have provided that for me, and in doing so, it has become my game of the year for 2025. So I really have to tip my hat to Jennifer Svedberg in writing such a balanced narrative to allow the whole thing to work. And to be real, fellas, it was a story that captured my attention from the beginning to the end, and will continue to live on in my head rent-free probably for years to come, in the same way that a lot of other great experiences have done before it. Like I said, gang, this is just one of those games that always kind of makes me reminisce. It's like, am I overhyping something? Like, am I insane? Are these opinions like shared, or are they whatever? And the fact of the matter is that, like, the fact that this game has been living in my head rent free, that I agonize so freaking hard that I didn't even get tickets for a concert series that they're probably going to do more concerts because it's sold out immediately. And just that, like, I'm listening to the soundtrack and just like almost tearing up because the soundtrack is so good, and it reminds me of the moments of the game, and the emotions in it are so violently strong that it almost makes me want to tear up. Like, it's just crazy. And so it's just one of those, like, you play through the game and you listen to the soundtrack. Every time I write these, whether it be any in the top 10, when I write a game, I listen to the soundtrack because it's kind of a way for me to remember the experience and get my mind jogging that. And with Expedition 33, it's just one of those soundtracks, like, I'm listening there, I'm typing on my keyboard, I'm just shaking my head. Like, God damn, this shit is good. This shit is so good, it's not even funny. And so with that, yeah, you bet your ass, Claire Obscure, Expedition 33, I am so genuinely proud to say that it is the game of the year for 2025, and a well-deserved one at that. Moils and ghouls, I will of course say that just because Expedition 33 is my game of the year, that it doesn't negate the other incredible experiences that have come out this year, ranging from Last Defense Academy to Trails in the Sky to KCD2 and even more out there stuff like Beyond Citadel. One thing that I've come to really appreciate this year is the power that we, the audience, have in uplifting and celebrating these incredible experiences, and how as good custodians for this most blessed of arts that we have a duty to prop up our heroes on our shoulders and wish them the greatest of successes. This feeling especially got embedded into me whenever I got to see the devs for Expedition 33, whether that be Guillaume or Lorianne or Jennifer, to go up and give out some sort of acceptance speech, and that every time they do that, they are so incredibly open about the influences and where they come from, and they wear that shit so openly on their sleeve that it really should be a reminder for the rest of us that we should love and be proud of the things that make us, well, us. So with that, I genuinely recommend Claire Obscure Expedition 33 to anyone that seems interested, and especially to anyone that are fans of turn-based RPGs or the old JRPG. And if you're a little apprehensive of that style of gameplay, I think there are enough active combat elements in the combat that can ease just about anyone into having fun playing this game and enjoy the spectacular narrative. And so with that, above all other games on this list, Expedition 33 is the one that I would point to. Clair Obscure Expedition 33 can be found at the relatively humble price of $65 Canadian or 50 euros, which is absolutely worth it for the experience, but for those that are a little price conscious, you can go and pick it up on Xbox Game Pass.
Oh my goodness, gang, and there we have it. That was the top 10 games of 2025. And like with every year, thank you so much for going on this goofy little journey. This video is so damn long that light over there turned off, and it's just like, you know what, I don't even care. I ain't gonna change it. I'm not gonna shoot this damn thing again. I'm not gonna split it. I don't care. It's a long ass video. The setup, the meta of it should even give up by the time this thing ends, because this has been so friggin' long. But once again, thank you so much, guys, for being there with me.
Every year we gotta do this little postscript, but for 2025, the triumphs of the year seem to have come from the so-called AA studios. Houses of development that might have started with indie aspirations, but through the years have grown enough to be able to showcase to the world the passion projects that they have always wanted to make. You can most easily see this with Expedition 33, where the gang at Sandfall Interactive were a band of former Ubisoft devs that struck out on their own and have created a wonderful generational title to the point that they are deservedly getting their flowers. We see this as well with the 100 line, Last Defense Academy, and making a game that frankly could have never ever been made at any of the big studios, because there is just no way in hell that anyone would greenlight creating such a monumentally large and ambitious visual novel. So with that, Kodaka and the gang at Tokyo Games went and made it happen on their own. And all throughout the list, we see this same sentiment. We see Ad Hoc break away and make Dispatch. We see Falcom get big enough to recreate Trails in the Sky into the game that they always had in their heads. We see Warhorse growing to the point that they have created a game that for the first time since my days playing Oblivion or Morrowind, I get that kind of whimsy into the world. And even all the other indie devs diligently working away on their passion projects, like Doi Kuramori working away for 5 years to give us all Beyond Citadel.
So as per usual, gang, there's always new and interesting games coming out and great creators to support. So as with every year, we always do a top 3 most anticipated games. So these are my most anticipated games coming out in 2026.
Starting off for 2026, I am not 100% certain that this game is going to come out this year, but for the first on my list, it's going to be Owlcat's latest CRPG in the 41st Millennium in Dark Heresy. In Warhammer 40,000 Dark Heresy, you play the role of an Inquisitor in service of the Inquisition of the Imperium of Man, basically the super space CIA of the Imperium, and you will be tasked with joining the retinue of a senior Inquisitor and investigating worlds for signs of the malignancy of the Witch, the treachery of the Xeno, and the unmitigated evil of the Demon that is poised to destabilize and destroy the Imperium in the Calixis sector. Already having made an incredible CRPG in Rogue Trader, I am pretty damn eager to see just what in the world does Owlcat have in store for enjoyers of the inky Inquisition of the 41st Millennium, which is someone who is currently writing a campaign for Dark Heresy that will likely never see the light of day because I am too damn busy. This game is gonna be a layup. But even if Dark Heresy doesn't come out this year, there is still a frankly ridiculous amount of Warhammer 40,000 titles coming out this year, with Boltgun 2, a Dawn of War 4 that might be actually really good, Mechanicus 2 where you get to play as both the Necrons and the Adeptus Mechanicus, and the one we all knew was going to come out eventually, but we have no friggin' idea how they're going to do it in Total War Warhammer 40,000. So yeah, there's gonna be a whole heck of a lot of Warhammer stuff this year, and honestly, I'm all for it. Second game that I have on this list for 2026 that I know for sure is coming out is Remedy Entertainment's Control Resonant. That is a sequel to 2019's Control, which of course is part of Remedy's weirdo Alan Wake / Control shared universe, but it's looking to be great. This time around in Control Resonant, you play the role of Dylan Faden, the brother of the previous game's protagonist who has been let out of his containment at the Federal Bureau of Control in order to defeat a cosmic entity that is destroying reality all over Manhattan. And by just looking at the trailer, this is going to be a pretty damn tall order to get to the bottom of. Now, I am of the opinion that pretty much everything that Remedy touches is guaranteed to be spectacular. So I'm definitely looking forward to see how badly my computer will run this game, because it looks absolutely gorgeous. And with how gorgeous and nice Alan Wake 2 was, my rig was really starting to chug at it and start to produce smoke. Not sure when this year it's supposed to come out, but there's a lot of rumors saying that we'll have Control Resonant sometime in Q2 in 2026. And for our last game, you friggin' knew I had to do it, and it's going to be Trails in the Sky's second chapter, which for this section, I'm only going to be showing footage from the first game because the trailer for the new game just very explicitly spoils the ending of first chapter. But anyway, I'm not even going to say the premise of second chapter because of course that's going to spoil it, but I would assume that it takes place right after the events of the first game, and with how friggin' nasty that cliffhanger was, you just know and you bet your ass I'm going to be there day one strangling the hell out of this game, begging for answers. But either way, fellas, after how much I friggin' love the first Trails in the Sky, I will absolutely be indulging in this second chapter sometime later this year. And there we have it, gang. This is the genuine actual end of the video, and with that, my goodness, what a long ass video. Usually at this point I apologize to future Tom for having a video be so long because I wrote it so long or whatever, but this time around I'm gonna give him shit because he got sick and I really wanted to record. So screw you, dude. I wanted to record, but your stupid ass was sick all the time, so no, I'm not gonna apologize to you this time. But regardless, gang, this year, my goodness, if you're here again and you watched all the way through, thank you so much. You guys have no genuine idea how happy it is that you guys make it all the way to the end here. And for anybody here that reaches the end, whether old or some new guys, thank you so much. I genuinely do appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. For all the new people that are here, hey, welcome to Tomthechosen1. This is a ridiculous feature-length video, and so if you watch it, thanks. I would recommend go watch some of my other stuff, and if you really like that, then hey, subscribe. That'd be pretty damn cool, just saying. But I really do this year more than I don't know why I'm so reflective this year, but I really do want to thank everybody that makes this journey not just worth it, but like that makes it such a great journey to be on. For all the people that are always watching my videos, for all the people that are always busting my balls for the next video or listening to the Tomcast, or especially like noticing people in real life and going, hey, you're from the Tomcast. That stuff is crazy. You guys are awesome. You're so tiny, but I'm not saying you're tiny, but like the fan base for the Tomthechosen1, anything, it's so small, but you guys are the best guys that I could ever hope for. And so genuinely from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. You guys are just awesome. I also want to say shout out once again to Mothman47. I know I like shouted your name out so many damn times. You were so cool to talk to, man. You're awesome. All the fellas out there, down in the description, go and listen to his stuff. It is incredible, it's beautiful, it's reflective, and if you want to get into the world of the Citadel, perhaps in there might be some sneak peeks at the third game, who knows. But regardless, give that man your well-deserved money and praise and flowers, because he deserves it and he's such a cool guy. The other guy that I also wanted to shout out at the end of this video is my wonderful, beautiful co-host Andrew, who this time around with this next upcoming Tomcast is he's the one actually editing it, and he has no friggin' clue how much that's gonna help me out. So but you don't know how much that helps me out, and so I am genuinely so happy and proud of you to have you editing that. And so, not that I have any slave labor in it, but the fact that you're doing that helps me out so much, it's not even funny. So I'm proud of you for doing that, and I'm glad for that. And yeah, once again, for all the people that support this channel, and I am excited to announce a new thing, a brand new endeavor. A lot of people have been asking for it. By a lot of people, a select few people have been asking for it, but I thought, hey, what the hell? Down below in the description, I have created a Ko-fi or a Ko-fi or whatever. It is a form of sort of crowdfunding or something like that. Basically, it's like a little tip jar. If you want to go in and leave a one-time tip, or if you want to pay recurringly every month, there are plans in there for you to do that. And that is something that people have been asking for, and I'm going to shill it there for the first time. And so officially, the Ko-fi is open. If you guys want to go down there and support me, I would appreciate so much that stuff. There are no exclusive anything. There's not like, I'm not gonna put anything behind a paywall. You guys know me. But I will say that all the proceeds of that go towards the Tomthechosen1 project. And as a goal, the goal that we have right now on the Ko-fi is an OSSC Pro, which is a digital upscaler for old consoles. So it is a thing that I want to use in tandem with my capture card and the PlayStation 2. So we can start doing retrospectives of PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 1 games. And then eventually, once I grab my my Super Nintendo, we do videos on those as well. But that is the project on the OSSC Pro. I think it's like 300 or some odd euros. But regardless, gang, every penny that you put to that goes into getting closer and closer to getting this stupid thing with the PS2 running, so we can do PS2 games. And ooh, that's gonna be fun. As for updates in the future, there's gonna be another video for that. So, but regardless, gang, be sure to keep watching, keep liking, comment. I gotta do these stupid things to shill at the end anyways, but like, comment, subscribe, comment your top 10 games or whatever games you enjoyed the most from 2025, or even what the hell, if there's anything in this list that you thought was cool or that you want to play, put that down in the description. I love to hear from you guys, or just do what everybody else does and they message me privately. You cowards, I wish you would just put it down there, but that's fine. Don't worry about it, just tell me. I really do love to hear about it. And so with that, yeah, we're gonna have more reviews, more retrospectives, way more retrospectives, because you guys like that stuff. And of course, more Tomcasts with not just myself, but our wonderful co-host Andrew, who's doing the editing, Waves and Wigs, and maybe, just maybe, we could get Mike too as well, if we can, kind of poke and prod him to actually come back and record some Tomcasts. He's a busy guy, but hey, you can't blame him. But regardless, gang, this is Tomthechosen1, and I am going to, I don't know, go break down, go blow my head off, smooth off with a shotgun. I don't even remember what my stupid sign-off joke was supposed to be. So with that, gang, this is Tomthechosen1 all, wishing you guys a brand new, wonderful year in 2026. And with that, hey, catch you guys next time. Take it easy.